We ran late in our executive session, so good to have you here. Welcome to City Hall. Have fun.
We're going to go watch the live.
Oh, you're going to? Okay, thank you. Okay. So, I know Commissioner Jones is coming. Why don't we tee this up and get started though?
All right, so you have the agenda in front of you. I'm going to move down to the stand and get going. But you can see we're trying to cover 8 things, including the 8th one being getting to the beginning of answers to some of the questions that we've received so far. And so when we get there, just because we haven't provided an answer to a question you asked doesn't mean we aren't working on one, it just means we haven't quite got it done yet. Okay?
All right.
So start with capital priorities.
How are you? Nice work this morning with the ordinance updates.
So today we're going to start budget review with a review of capital priorities. And just by way of reminder, we went through our session on December 5th. The bullet points you see in front of you in this order were the top-ranked capital priorities that we came up with. And I can report to you that these capital priorities have been woven into the fiscal 19 plan and the 5-year plan beyond that. It is just not talking into it. Sorry. So I can report to you that these investments are in your capital plan. Some of them are in the FY19 plan. They're all within the 5-year planning period. And so what we'll do is Scott Sandin first will go through the financial elements of the capital reserve fund and the capital improvement fund. Then we'll talk about a series of projects that are highlighted. Then we'll get into capital balance and distribution. And then you can see the rest of the agenda on the agenda. So we will start first with capital priorities. Okay.
Thanks, Eric. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Briefly walk you through the high-level financial information for both the capital reserve and capital improvement fund, as Eric mentioned. So I'm going to kick it off here on slide 4 with the capital reserve fund, and really. The takeaway from these first 3 bullets to know is that we have varied between a 4% and 5% capital set aside in recent years, and I'm pleased to tell you that we were able to maintain the capital set aside at 4.5% for all the years in this fiscal plan. I think going into the process, we suspected we might have to try to kick that back up to 5%, but I think we still met all the priorities while maintaining the 4.5%. Leaving that additional income tax for the general fund operating priorities. The 19 fiscal plan continues to place 1/2 of the CV-TRS revenues into the capital reserve fund. That stands for City, Village, Township Revenue Sharing. And that's remained basically flat over the years, so we continue to project that flat out the 5 years in this fiscal plan. We're also proposing a $1.3 million transfer into the capital reserve fund from the transformation fund for continued capital asset management. That was one of the tools that we did use to maintain that 4.5% capital set aside. Something I want to point out too, previously, not too many years ago, as a percentage of total capital reserve spending, debt service was upwards of 70% of the total expenditures in the capital reserve fund, even closing in on 75% at one point. And obviously, the more we're spending on debt service, that leaves less for us to set aside for capital investment. So I'm pleased to let you know that you'll see on a future slide, we've gotten that more down to a steady 55%. So very pleased with that. And finally, we came in at about $5.6 million total available in FY19 for new cash capital projects. This next slide here is the financial summary for the capital reserve fund. Just kind of walks through the beginning fund balance, revenue, debt service, and again, you'll see that $5.6 million in FY19 for capital expenditures. Basically, the role of the capital reserve fund is to accumulate revenues such as property, income tax, the CV-TRS, that's been appropriated for general capital projects as well as for debt service on the prior capital projects. The capital improvement fund, on the other hand, accounts for the acquisition and construction of the capital projects to be used in the government-type operations. So basically, the financing in the capital improvement fund is provided by the capital reserve fund, as well as private sources, grants, other things like that. Basically, this fund is used when there's a need for appropriations authority spanning more than 1 year. This slide here is just a graphical representation of the capital reserve fund revenues, comprising property tax, income tax, and the CVTRS obviously being the largest slices. You'll also see some investment income, some reimbursements, as well as that $1.3 million transfer from the transformation fund. I really like this next slide because it really demonstrates the impact of debt service on our capital investment. You can see the top line is our debt service, the orange line, and you kind of see it building in 19, 20, 21. And right below it, you'll see the level of capital investment. And that really corresponds when that's been building up over the first 3 years. We kind of have to let off the throttle a little bit there in FY21 to balance things out. So again, just emphasizing the key of maintaining good control and good planning on the debt service. At the bottom of this schedule, you'll see a couple flat lines. One is the $325,000 annual transfer for cemetery repairs in the cemetery operating fund. And the last line, ranging from about $65,000 to $70,000, is the capital reserve fund share of 87 cost. This fund here is what I alluded to a little bit earlier with the debt service trend. I took it back to FY13. I think if you go back a little further, it closes on upward of 75% is what debt service was comprising in this fund. You can see now when we get to 18 on out to 23, I think we have one little anomaly in 21, but for the most part, we're holding right around 55% debt service in this fund. Sliding over to the capital improvement fund now, this is a graphical representation of the revenue sources in the capital improvement fund. Again, that first piece in the upper right is the cash coming in from the capital reserve fund to fund all the general fund department projects. We have $4.1 million from the transformation fund for Grand River revitalization. We're anticipating the $10 million street lighting bond, $5 million for the Lion Square project. And again, we'll do a deeper dive on all these projects in a little bit when Eric comes back up. We have almost $7 million for the Knapp's Crossing project, and then a little bit of cable grants revenue flows into this fund and is balanced out with the expenditures. The next slide just summarizes, gives you the full 5-year look of what we're anticipating in terms of proposed new bond financing within the capital improvement fund. Again, we've already mentioned that we're anticipating a couple slugs for street lighting, $10 million in FY19, and then a secondary issue in FY22. We have the proposed Division Street Fire Station in FY21 at just under $6.3 million. And then we have 2 bond issues segregated by the storm outlet drainage and the Dunnigan water main for Knapp's Crossing in 19. And finally, the last one, $5 million anticipated for Lion Square.
Sorry, just a quick note. By that item on the cow this morning with the water main for Dunnigan, we'll be removing that 910 from preliminary to final book because that was solved another way this morning. So okay. You'll see that on your agenda tonight.
Great, thank you.
Thank you. This next slide here, still in the capital improvement fund, this gives you just, again, a representation of the revenues by fiscal year. You'll kind of see the different bond issues anticipated in FY19. Sliding over to the appropriation side or the investment side in the capital improvement fund, this just kind of shows the whole 5-year period, how we anticipate spending the revenues in the capital improvement fund. We have the Grand River, the cash funded projects from Capital Reserve, street lighting, Lion Square, basically all the projects you saw in the previous slide except now being invested on the expenditure side in capital improvement. This here now we get into a little bit of detail as far as I had mentioned the cash funded projects that were accumulated in the Capital Reserve Fund. This gives you a little more detail of exactly what comprises that amount. We're maintaining stormwater at the level C goal at about $826,000. facilities, about 2.8 million. In terms of fire and police equipment, we did skinny that down a little bit from past years. We basically kind of clamped down a little bit on what truly met the definition of capital projects and started weeding out some of the non-capital items that the comptroller department wasn't going to capitalize anyways, and we've pushed those back into each of the department operations within the general fund. You'll see $585,000 for the land acquisition for the Division Street Fire Station. We also have $50,000 for Martin Luther King Lodge redevelopment study in FY19. $83,000 to traffic safety, and then the next 4 projects are all managed by our engineering department. So we have $500,000 for Grand River revitalization, with the $4.1 million directly below it coming from the transformation fund. We have the Seward Street underpass lighting at $100,000, and then we have some streetscape improvement budgeted at $50,000 a year for Southtown and Granville corridor. The clerk's department is going to be picking up a new MasterCard filing system, $150,000. We have the cable grants also plugged in for total cash side investments of just under $10.3 million. And then secondly on this slide is just a brief summary once again of the anticipated bond finance projects. Again, Knapp's Crossing, street lighting, Lions Square, totaling just under $22 million. And with that, I'll turn it back over to Eric, and he'll do a little deeper dive into some specific projects.
Thank you, Scott, and I'll ask Suzanne to join me. So, because we'll get to her slides in a moment. So we'll go through now a series of investments that will meet the priorities that you talked about, that we talked about, and have been included in the budget. So the first one we talked a little bit about last budget review, and this is an investment in the refurbishment of the street lighting system. First dealing with infrastructure, and then and also dealing with LED lights. So this would be a $20 million investment over 2 bond issues, and would bring our street lighting system back to a better standing, and would put it more on an asset management schedule like the rest of our investments. Part of the bond issue would be paid back through energy savings, and so we'd be saving operating expenditures, which are good, and that we need to do this if we're going to continue in the business of street lighting. So next, exciting news about the Heartside project. So we briefed you on that a while ago, and Suzanne's here to update you on where we are with that lighting project.
Step back for 1 second.
Sure.
For the capital improvement for the lighting stuff, though, I mean, I think there's been several of us around this table that have asked on multiple occasions about the energy audit stuff from some of the private sector folks, and I just feel like we haven't given that any capacity to talk about that, other than, hey, we're just going to keep putting 10 million, put 10 million here and 10 million there, and this is a done deal, and we're not going to actually explore the other options that we say we're going to. So,
Which energy audit? Oh, working with the, okay, the TELPs and what
well, I think I'm about some folks from Johnson Control. I mean, I know they're not the only ones, but I know that there's some folks in the world that specialize in this, where it might not have to impact our bonding capacity in the future.
Yeah, we did talk about this. I'll let Eric weigh in, but we also talked about it at our Energy Advisory Committee, and have had some additional audits done, but go ahead.
Okay. So in terms of how we deliver the project, I think we've looked at the TELPs. The TELPs are only available for the lighting piece, for the LED piece, because you have to be producing some energy efficiency in order to be eligible. So it would not be available for the infrastructure piece. And so the lighting piece is about 8 million, the infrastructure piece is about 12 million. We've also looked at ESCO contracts, and one example that was brought to our attention that was the city of Marquette, who did a large TELP for their project. And we have a very good bond rating, and we have capacity. And so there's actually a savings, we think, in the cost of money by using our money rather than private money in these cases. We haven't ruled out doing it through an ESCO, but generally we think we can deliver this in a less expensive way using our bonding capacity. And so we have looked at it. Jeff has more information if you'd like to hear Jeff talk about it, but that's basically the thumbnail.
Eric, can you also speak to, and I can't remember if we talked about this last week when we talked about street lighting or not, that we just finished up a partnership with consumers and they did an audit and reviewed a number of buildings, but also their rates, and are making a recommendation to adjust rates, and that will save us a significant amount of money annually.
Yeah, that came out of, I think, the Energy Advisory Committee and work that was done there, and we'll save about $500,000 a year just based on a review of rates. And when Allison talks about what the priority is for the Energy Advisory Committee and doing energy, the first thing really is getting our house in order. And so that would be doing energy audits, again, making sure that all of our facilities are as efficient as possible, and then moving on to improvements, which might including solar and other things. So energy savings is a key component. Okay. All right. So we talked about this a month or two ago, maybe 3 months ago. And when we talked about it, we weren't we hadn't identified all the sources for the uses. Now we have. And Suzanne could talk a little bit about that.
Good afternoon, Mayor and Commissioners. This is an exciting project for a couple of reasons. One is that it is at the request of the neighborhood. When they provided you with a letter in the summer of 2016, there was a request for lighting, and I'll talk a little bit more about that. But also it's been a true collaborative effort among city departments, the neighborhood, and DGRI. I do want to recognize Chris Zoll, who's here. He's been all into all the lighting and the stuff. Bree Stam, Letitia Lipscomb, and Captain Reifenberg, who really brought this to light. We started with a security assessment request from Hartside, and they went through and looked at that with the police department and evaluated where things were at risk. This area is considered a high crime area, and in fact, 77% of assaults and robberies in the central service area occur in Hartside. And so when we look to take a deeper dive, I actually have forwarded to you the report that's specific to this geographic area so you can get in a sense of where the hot spots are. The neighborhood, in doing that security assessment and looking about what's possible, they found that they needed to increase lighting along South Division corridor and the side streets from South Division, Sheldon to Commerce Avenue, and then as well as some of the other things on their wish list was improving parking options, including bike parking, better signage for car parking, increasing police presence. The issue when they looked at the crime data and identified those hot spots, it was very, very clear that all along South Division, as we were doing an analysis, that lighting levels were deficient in this area, that we had kind of pieced together over the years a lighting system consisting of some decorative light poles, some cobra heads, and the light levels are not what the standard would be in our neighborhoods. So this work group with the city staff, GRPD, neighborhood, DGRI, and the consultants spent the past 2 years looking at the light levels, what could be done in the very near future. So Crystal actually implemented some interim solutions to try to improve it, including cleaning the lamps and adding some temporary lighting. But during the lighting audit, we looked through a series of alternatives and had a preferred solution developed. Some of those alternatives included private interventions. Could we add additional lighting onto some of the private buildings and alleyways? There was concern about the sustainability of that, whether or not those lights would stay on, who would pay for them, how that works. And it really became pretty obvious as we were working through that the solution needed to be a public infrastructure solution, given that we already had substandard light levels in there. So the Esplanade fixtures, which are shown in the pictures, those double-headed light fixtures that you see, we have them over Pearl Street Bridge by the museum. Those were recently installed. Those were identified as the preferred because it provides both pedestrian lighting as well as the street lighting, and these would be on both sides of the street with the twin mast arm. It also provides opportunities for banners and other things that are important to the neighborhood. I know on their wish list was pedestrian scale lighting, so it was trying to figure out how much lighting and where those fixtures work, as well as being very cost efficient in deciding what the preferred alternative would be. These lights do have cones in them for night sky and to shield the residential on the upper levels. And then it would also include LED lights, which are blue or white color spectrum for better color rendering and brightness. And then the way that they're setting it up is that for future lighting technologies, you could have some more flexibility with dimming or other things as needs arise, and how we can determine whether there's financial savings. And this is another rendering of what that might look like. The projects that are shown on this map of the project show the year that they're to be constructed and being in color coded. The lights will be implemented in phases starting in the summer of 2018. Sheldon and Weston are first. So Sheldon is expected to start at the end of May, beginning of June. Improvements include the lights installed on the east side of the street, a traffic signal, rework, new sidewalks and paving, and the streetscape design plans have been shared with all of the persons who've been involved in this work. Weston Street will also be improved from LaGrave to Sheldon. That's shown in red on this map, and that will include 3 new street lights and brick paving. South Division, which is shown in blue on the map, that's construction will begin late summer and fall of this year from Fulton to Cherry Street. This is the area of the highest impact, we believe, as far as crime data has shown, and where the biggest need exists. And so that will happen in the summer, fall of 18, and then the next phase, that green portion to the south of Cherry, from Cherry to Wealthy, will happen in 2019. That is tied to MDOT funding, and we're working with the consultant on street design there. We have had some jurisdictional issues here, as you know, with the MDOT turnback. It does provide us some opportunity to take a new look at that street. MDOT has had jurisdiction of Division from Weston to the north, so as we look at this and how we design that, we can also take that into account. We've also been doing a lot of community engagement through our neighborhood planning work, through our quality of life plan that we've partnered with Dwelling Place. Jen Schaub in particular has been amazing, and Letitia Lipscomb has been leading that. Letitia is a contract employee with the planning department. She's also a neighborhood resident. And so she's been great. They've convened hundreds of people in listening sessions throughout the neighborhood to talk about this. The idea of safety and lighting has been something that has regularly come up during those meetings and has been expressed as a concern by the community. So I think what's really exciting about this work is that we're able to take the crime data that was provided by Captain Reifenberg, because he has been very concerned. We've used data to drive this decision. We used an engagement model with multiple departments and agencies to come up with a preferred alternative, and then we are implementing that solution. As Eric mentioned, we were looking at sources and uses, and so it shows that we have a diverse range of funding types. The amount of investment sources include DDA grants, Vital Streets money, capital improvement funds. There will be some reconstruction, so there will be some involvement of water and sewer funds for non-lighting work. And then Weston and Oaks from Commerce to Sheldon will be constructed in 2020 with city capital improvement funds. So we will have a future work that on the other maps, some of those side streets will still need some additional investment in the future. We continue to work on that, but the bulk of the work is funded as shown in the top two portions. And so that is our recommendation for you for the Hartside neighborhood lighting. The total number, just to give you an idea for the next 5 years, this project's roughly $6.7 million. That includes the road reconstruction. So of that, about $1.5 million is the lighting investment in the Hartside neighborhood.
Mayor?
Yeah, go ahead.
So a few questions for you. And I know we talked about this before, and I asked some of these same questions before, and I'm gonna ask them again. And we're talking about $20 million in the last slide for lighting for the city, and now we're talking about $6.7 million to do one neighborhood. Now again, I've been engaged in these conversations. I know this is an important thing. I know we need to be doing something about the lighting along South Division. Again, we're showing the decorative light poles as an upgrade. There does not seem to be any neighborhood contribution as a funding source. I mean, there's a delta that exists between regular, whatever we call them, snakehead light poles and these things. There's money there that exists. And this is a 4-year project. We've also talked about temporary lighting, not just temporary on buildings, but there's other ways to accomplish the goal of safety in the neighborhood without having to build infrastructure as a temporary solution to provide safety that the neighborhood desires now, so that a more comprehensive plan can be built that saves money.
So the lighting portion is 1.5 million. The total, including the street construction, is 6.7. The local share is the DDA money, is the DGRI money that's being contributed into it. They collect taxes from that area. That's what's going into this work. And I think from an equity standpoint, if you look at downtown and all the street lighting improvements that have across throughout downtown, this is one area that has substandard lighting and does not have uniform fixtures as you see in the rest of the district, which I think also supports the DGRI contribution as well as the city investment.
And so we can get started on this this summer. And then to the point, Commissioner, that you made about where's the local investment, the DDA traditionally has invested in decorative poles within its district, and that's where the local investment is coming from. So there's a base cost to the city for whatever we normally would do, and then there's over and above that is what the DDA is bringing in to afford the decorative poles. The side streets are going to be accomplished, but the main issues currently happen on Division. And the main issues happen on the section that's going to be done this year, which would be this summer, which will be from Fulton to Cherry Street. So there are easy temporary solutions, but they're not.
But again, the side streets are still an issue, and so
Yep.
if we have the ability to fix the problem with minimal capital outlay, where we lease some lights for a summer to accomplish the goal, why don't we do that? Like, I still can't.
We could do that on the side streets. I think the
Just-
goal of the committee and of the DDA and the persons who were planning this, including me, was to try to do something that was permanent on Division Street.
Absolutely, and I appreciate the fact that we're gonna do something permanent, we're gonna do it right. I mean, we're
Right.
Grand Rapids, we generally do things right, but I also feel like sometimes in Grand Rapids, we just bureaucrat the hell out of everything and make it harder than it is. People just want light. Put some lights out and they'll have light. Like, it does not seem that complicated. And we just the last time we talked about this, it was, well, we tried to talk to, and you brought it up, talk to property owners about hanging lights. So that's infrastructure that isn't permanent. Like, let's use a temporary solution to solve a temporary problem until we can get to the fact that we can do permanence the correct way. It just seems like we overcomplicate this thing sometimes.
Well, we'll continue to look at temporary lighting on the side streets if you'd like.
Commissioner Lanier, and then Commissioner Kelly.
So, Eric, I will go back to the conversation that we had last week when we talked about the bond for the $10 million bond, or $20 million, because we'll do more than one.
Right.
My colleague, Commissioner O'Connor, just kind of shared some of the same sentiments that I shared last week. And I want to go a step further. So last week in particular, I was saying that it would be great to have a conversation about how we're funding everything at this larger scale at the same time so that we can prioritize. And Jeff, in his response, which I appreciate, reminded me that through the priority exercise that we had done, that the lighting became a priority for this commission. After that meeting, I kept thinking about that, and he's absolutely right. That is exactly what came out of that discussion. However, there was something that's near and dear to me that also came out of that discussion, and it was the protest that Commissioner Allen and I had as Third Ward commissioners, because none of the capital projects were impacting the Third Ward to the same, period. And so you and I, along with Commissioner Allen, have been having some conversations about what type of investments can the city do in the Third Ward to demonstrate to the Third Ward that we are no longer interested in having inequitable capital improvement projects. So here we are now today in our third or fourth budget session, and we're talking about capital improvement projects. And what I saw for the Third Ward was $50,000 for King Park and $50,000, I think, for the Southtown SID. And so when I look at those numbers and I compare those numbers to the numbers that were on that back window as we were prioritizing, as everyone else was prioritizing and Dave and I were participating in that prioritization, this amount does not impact the Third Ward at any level close to what the other capital improvement projects proposed. And so I guess I was expecting a whole lot more from staff when we expressed our frustration about the lack of capital improvement projects for the third ward. So you're right, this was the priority list from before, but we also knew that there was a deficit. So there should have been something at a high level coming back before this body for this fiscal cycle that we're about to approve a budget for to impact the third ward. And we've missed the boat.
Well, what I would ask you to do is wait till we get through the capital prioritization discussion here, and then I can answer your question. Because there are projects that are coming up that are in the third ward. So there's the $50,000 study for MLK Lodge that I think will lead to a bigger project. But we have to do the pre-work before we can get the larger investment in place. So that's the intent of that. The $50,000 a year for corridor improvement districts are actually going to go along with a bunch of other vital streets projects that will be done within the Southtown SID and other districts. And so those dollars are there to help leverage and match other dollars that might be invested by the SID or others to help do amenities there.
But
Yeah.
Eric, outside of what you're indicating for King Park, that will happen across the entire city.
No, the $50,000 to match those projects would not happen throughout it's not recommended for the remainder of the city.
I'm talking about the street projects that you were referencing, saying that it will help to leverage those. Those projects will happen throughout the entire city. And do you really think that, so let me be clear, I appreciate the effort of trying to extend an olive branch. I just think it's a bit short.
Right. Also, I'd like to suggest that the street lighting projects, the overall, the $20 million project affects the entire city,
Sure.
not just one part of it. So,
Absolutely.
and we'll start with the outside neighborhoods, work our way in. And so, in this case, the downtown authority will be the DDA, the core, will actually be the last done, not the first done. And so we'll start at the edges of the annexed area, as we talked last time, and work our way in.
Well, I'll say this and I'll be done. We have talked a whole lot about equity in this city, and this body this administration has talked a lot about equity. And until we start making equitable decisions consistently, I think we need to shut up talking about it.
Well, Commissioner Lanier, I'm sorry you feel that way, and I guess the way, we're working to develop projects. That's what the planning is going on in the Southtown SID, is to help develop ideas and make area ready so we can do the kinds of investments that you're talking about. And the same thing with the Southtown Corridor Improvement District and what's happening along Plaza Roosevelt. So if you look there, we have the Plaza Roosevelt project that's being developed, and there are significant investments happening around that to help facilitate that development. And so, which I think is an equitable investment. So there are steps that need to be taken to get to that point, and I'm more than willing to take those with you, and if I'm ready to do it. And I have asked for ideas for projects, and we're,
So do we want to go there? Do we want to have this discussion right here, Eric? Or do we want to end this discussion and have a discussion offline?
I can have a discussion offline.
Okay, so let's end the discussion and have that discussion offline.
Fine.
Well, and Commissioner, I appreciate you bringing that up again, and all of us were a part of that conversation, and we all recognize the need for additional investment in Third Ward. So I appreciate you bringing that up again. Commissioner Kelly had her hand up, and then Commissioner Allen.
Well, I just wanted to say that if we can get some data, I'm sure we already got it from Captain Riefenberg in terms of the crime stats there, but then also I would assume we will get some, in a year or two after, once the projects are done, after 2018 and 2019 in those areas.
Yep.
Because it's so helpful to get a sense of how that's preventing crime as well. And I did want to talk in general about streetlights, but I think I'll wait till we get to that part.
Okay, well, and then follow up, it would be helpful to know, I saw the numbers of crimes and percentages, but it would be nice to know if we can put cost to that, because I do think there's good data, at least nationally, about how certain environmental changes like lighting can impact crime, but in the long run, it reduces overall cost of service provision.
That's absolutely the goal. According to the 2015 and 2016 data, 10% of all robberies and 5% of all assaults occurred right in that corridor, right where we're doing the lighting project. So if we look at trying to reduce calls for service and protecting people who are vulnerable in the neighborhood
And crime prevention.
and crime prevention, that's exactly, this is the spot, the project to make the biggest difference in the city.
Thank you. Commissioner Allen?
Couple things. I'm having a hard time seeing these numbers, either on here or on here.
No, I can't read them either.
So when we're talking about the division corridor street lighting, what's the total cost and what's our cost that we're proposing bonding?
I don't think we're bonding any of this.
No.
So
Okay.
this is separate from the larger street lighting
Right.
issue.
All right, so let me rephrase the question. What's the total cost and what's the total cost that's gonna come out of our capital improvement fund?
We have a summary someplace.
I just, I
Have a bigger
know it's
we
here,
have-
I just can't see
Yeah,
it.
so we have a bigger, more confusing spreadsheet.
Great. I just want the number.
Thanks,
Seems
and I appreciate you
appropriate.
saying that, because we did talk about this at the DDA already and
Yeah,
approved
I
funding.
just
I just
wanna
can't
know
remember
what the
how
number
much.
is.
Looking for is this number, the capital improvement fund?
No, I think they're looking for.
Okay. Right. All right, so the total Vital Streets funds that we'll be spending, including all projects, not just street lighting, was
Can you break down just street lighting?
just street lighting? Okay, so in this column, there's no Vital Streets funds. The DDA funds are $448,000. $448,000. In terms of capital improvement fund, it's $552,000. TAP grant was $5,000, and the STPU grant was $185,000.
So we did get grant funding to offset the cost.
So our cost is $552,000?
Yeah.
Yes.
So the lighting portion of it? All right. So this is the last time I'm gonna comment on this, so, I promise. So and this relays this, not only to this conversation, but this conversation previously about the $10 million, potentially $20 million bond for street lighting. I heard two distinct things from staff. And let me preface by saying, you know, part of this is we're at a bit of a disadvantage because we've got really incredibly smart staff and they do a lot of work to prepare this stuff. And then we're asking for these questions kind of on the fly, and sometimes it feels like we get rote answers like our suggestion isn't even being considered. I know that's not the case, but that's just kind of the way it feels for what it's worth.
Okay.
But there is the infrastructure to put the lighting in, which is in desperate need of repair. And I don't think anybody around this table disagrees that needs to be done. That's our responsibility as a city. And I heard if you take the total 20 million, that number is pegged at 12 million for the infrastructure.
Correct.
And then 8 million is for the LED lighting.
LED lights,
The fixtures and the technology. So from my very simple perspective, the city on an annual basis only has a limited amount of appetite or tolerance for bond issuances because we do a great job scheduling this out. So what we heard from city staff was 10 million in phase one, another 10 million down the road, and that's been planned out. I've also heard there are some priorities that have come out of our planning session, which the third ward, and I won't go there any further, as well as Commissioner Lanier brought up, you know, lead. Is there something we do about lead? Just to toss that out as an example. That's just as an example. So there are other means of financing the 8 million, and 8 million is nothing to scoff at. So I would contend that we could knock off the entire 12 million in one bond issue to get the infrastructure put together and come up with possibly another way to finance the street lighting, and then we have another $8 million in bond capacity that we could use for something else, even if we set it aside until we determine from these planning charrettes. And I'm not trying to overthink what you great staff have already done, but it's just from a very simplistic standpoint, that's just how I look at how to stack the deck.
Well, we have, and that's.
Does that make sense, Eric? And I'm trying not to be offensive and oversimplifying it.
I'm not offended. So, because you called us brilliant, so why would I be offended? So we have to look at the bonding is a financing mechanism, but it's not. It's like the mortgage on your house. So we can all get a big mortgage. Or a lot of us, we can get the biggest mortgage we want, but we have to be able to pay for it. And so there's always a balance between the borrowing and the paying. So the TELP or doing it through an ESCO is just a different way of paying for it. And you still, in the end, have to pay for it. So what we've tried to do is provide a system where those are kind of in balance, and we know we can continue with our priorities, whatever they might be. So that's how this mix of projects has been assembled, is to try to look at available resources that we can predict that'll be steady over time, and how we might then pay for them at the same time.
And just for Commissioner O'Connor wasn't here last time that we talked about this, I think the important thing for the street lighting is that there is an ROI on that investment, and which will assist in paying off the bond.
Yes, it will.
So that, again, thinking of revenue to pay back the bonds, whether it's financed through bonding or another mechanism like you brought up, with that portion, there is a clear return on investment that helps pay for that.
Yep.
Like your mortgage on your
Right.
house. Yeah.
Okay, so
Any other questions? Commissioner Kelly, did you say you had a question about street lighting?
It was when we talked about the larger.
Okay, sorry.
okay, Suzanne's done. All right, so this is the focus on the Division Avenue Fire Station. And so this station is located at the corner of Brown and Division. It's ancient. It's not our oldest one, but it is the one that is in the worst shape, I think. And so what we're proposing here is to find a new location along this corridor within the proper service area for response. And then we would redevelop that area in the area that we acquire. And then we would sell the current location for redevelopment. So we would end up in this scenario with the rehabilitated lot where we locate the fire station, and also then a new investment on this street within the BRT corridor between Brown and we also own some properties to the south of the Brown fire station. So that's what this is about. And so in this year's budget, there would be an amount for acquisition of land, and then we would bond in fiscal 2021. So, and the reason for the delay is that we would first acquire the property, and then once that happened, we would begin design and do construction.
Commissioner.
Real quick question, and this is only just because this is what I do every day, is just look at property. So I do know that the Housing Commission owns a significant amount of vacant land on Division, not too far from this location. I don't even need an answer. I'm just
Okay.
just south of the corner of Franklin and Eastern. There's all that empty land, and it's just sitting there. And now they may have spoken for something, but it's always just curious to me why that couldn't be affordable housing, or why that couldn't be a fire station, or
Okay. Well, we'll look into that.
it's a very large, extremely large.
I think
piece
is
of-
that up by the school?
Yes, near there.
Up by
They
Franklin?
own that entire parcel?
Yes, look it up.
Franklin and Eastern?
On Division,
Oh, Division.
south of Franklin, south of their community center on the corner of Franklin.
On
There's
the west
all
side?
huge piece of vacant land.
That's
I think
housing.
that's school property, isn't it?
Some of it's school and some of it's the Housing Commission.
Some of it isn't buildable. I can't remember what's
Just-
under it, but I remember
Just,
that.
just pointing it
Huh.
out.
Yep.
Worth looking at.
Well, and we've got to, when we select the location for the station, we need to be within the service area. So we have to make sure that we can still meet the metrics that the police department wants to do, or the fire department would like to do. So that's kind of the analysis too. So we've got to find the right parcel within the right zone district in order to make it work. But
Yeah, and
we'll take any ideas for properties that meet those parameters.
well, and speaking of that, I know that the Parks Department is actively looking at land in the Third Ward for park acquisition as well, knowing that there's a real need there.
Right.
And I think they're still fleshing out some possibilities, so.
Okay. All right, so there's that. Lion Square is a downtown project that would be done with and you've already authorized bonds for this actually. So what this budget depicts is the issuance of the bonds in fiscal 2019. And then we would have $1 million in private donations, $4 million in DDA investment, and $1 million from the city for this project. And what it would do is remake the current kind of ancient amphitheater there that's not in that good a shape and turn it into a inviting river activation spot. And this was one of the projects that came out of our GR Forward work.
And Eric, remind me, does this stabilize and address the flood wall?
We would be doing flood wall work here as well. So we're in good shape
This is
now.
one of the-
This would make it better and take it to the higher level.
And this, because this, correct me if I'm wrong, this was one of the sites that FEMA that's in the LAMP report, isn't it?
I think
That-
we have done the improvements to the lamp level. I know we've done it because we've certified them. So what we would do here is using the area to the back, we try to take it to the next higher level. So
Okay,
we'd keep the level at the wall and then make it a little bit better in the back.
okay.
Here. Okay, Knapp's Corner. We talked about this today, and so we have much work to do on phase two. So the amount of dollars in the budget that we were going to bond for would be, I would say, indeterminate at this point. So we have a placeholder there, and we'll move forward when we have a better plan. Meanwhile, we'll do the water main financing this year. So river, we've got dollars here to support the river over the next 5 years. We also have the dollars coming in from the Transformation Fund to complete the acquisition of the Monroe North property. And there's also a reserve there for development of that property once we acquire it and once we're done using it for staging for the river project.
It's 2 acres.
So the transit improvement project, so this is in the budget and we expect to get it underway this year. And we've been doing a lot of work, so the Mobile GR group, Kristen and Josh, have been working to get this ready for implementation in collaboration with ITP. And we think we can invest about $250,000 a year for 2 years, and we'll prioritize transit stops in areas that are higher volume, but don't yet have stops. So we would, and instead of the traditional stop, where you can see the little disc with the post, which doesn't provide any shelter from the elements, we would have shelters. So in those locations.
Eric, can we get a breakdown? If I haven't received an update on this project in a while, but if I remember, weren't there a significant number in the third ward that we were focusing on?
Yes, there were.
Okay, can we get a breakdown of that?
Yep.
And I think we also asked about advertising revenue last time as well.
We
Yeah,
did,
that's
and
one of our, thank you, we're working on that.
There's a
and
study.
We have to figure out how to get it done from a zoning perspective. But yes, well, we are anxious about advertising here in parks and elsewhere. So.
I heard that. So yes, that is still being explored. I don't know, is Josh here?
I don't think so.
I know that they're working on that because they're having conversations with the Rapid as well.
Yep. Okay, so we'll get you a distribution of the prospective stops, okay? All right, so here's the Lodge project. This is a magnificent building and could be even more significant. So the idea here is to collaborate to do a study to see how we might reuse and rehabilitate the portion of the building that's not been rehabilitated, and then perhaps expand its use and its ability to be programmed. So there are parties in the community that are interested in assisting with that, and we would do this in partnership with them. Calder Plaza, this is out in the 2024. We would do planning in 2022. And so the reason that this is extended out is that we have to wait until we do the roof deck. So the part that we walk on is actually the roof of the parking ramp, and there's a membrane between the two cement layers that needs to be repaired. So until that's done, it doesn't make sense to do capital improvements on top of it. So this underpass on Seward, you can see the sidewalk over on the left-hand side. It's the only walk because we can't do anything on the right-hand side because of the rail ownership. We've inquired several times and can't do anything over there. So what we would want to do is do some lighting here to provide for pedestrian access as we see development happening along the Seward corridor. And then the Hastings Connector is in conjunction with the work that's being done with Noble and GVSU and Spectrum in the ramp. And so the first projects would be coming up within this 5-year planning period, and actually would be completed within this 5-year planning period. And there would be a combination of local funds, vital street funds, perhaps tax increment revenue, and grant funds to get this done. Also water and sewer funds. Stormwater, we're continuing to move down the path, and our funding at stormwater level C. One of the questions that came up at a prior commission meeting was what would it take to get to stormwater level B, and we will provide that information to you. So, but these are the capital projects that are here for this year. So this is the Southtown ASP and other SIDS. And so we have a variety of projects happening within the area having to do with street reconstruction or improvements. And what these funds are there for is to help with local amenities that we can't pay for with vital street funds. And so this would help leverage funds that might be raised privately or maybe invested by the Southtown SID to help enhance the value of these projects. So there is a series of cemetery projects that will be done, and these are being financed by a bond that was issued in 2017. And these are capital projects within the cemeteries, and you can see them listed here. And so and we'll talk a little bit more about how they're distributed around the community when we get to balance and distribution discussion in a few moments. So here is just a pie chart showing how they're invested. Okay, so that is a highlight of the priority projects in the capital reserve and capital improvement funds. Scott Sandin can talk about balance and distribution, and then we can take other capital questions.
Mayor?
Unless there's one now.
Go ahead.
Real quick, and it's a minor thing, but bears mentioning right now, I do know that there's been, I've talked about this before, there's tremendous amount of angst in the folks who live in the Madison Hall, Eastern Hall area about Woodlands, about Oak Hill Cemetery. And the one thing that I had asked was if a city could have a sign put up saying work to start on such and such a date, so people at least know that it's coming.
Okay.
If the work's going to start soon, no need to do that, because I asked for it about a year ago. But at least it'll let people know that it's funded, it's
Right away.
underway, it's going to get started. Just a smart idea. 'Cause
Okay.
it's a high
We can do
traffic
that.
area.
Yeah,
All right.
I agree. When is that going to start?
I don't know. I don't think, Jeff,
Should
you
be
know?
advertised this week, so.
Okay, so Jeff says it's going to be out to bid this week. So we'll work on a project sign.
Okay.
So
So
if
if it's out to bid, what's the timeline then for
Jeff, why don't you?
bids being awarded and construction starting? I agree with Commissioner Allen. I feel like this has been a priority for a long time.
Yeah, I'm not sure the exact date of the pre-bid, but that's usually about 2 weeks after the bid documents hit the table. With the commission cycle being June 5 and June 12, we wouldn't be able to hit either of those, so it would probably be awarded at one of the commission meetings in July. So,
Could they, are they gonna start construction though, right after they're awarded?
yeah, it would probably begin in August.
Okay, okay. Thank you. Thanks, Jeff.
All right, so thank you. Let's move on to balance and distribution.
Thank you, Eric. This brief presentation is a continuation. If you remember back in, I want to say mid-February, we selected 5 specific areas, including vital streets, parks, cemeteries, stormwater, and sidewalk repair. And what we want to do is take a look at how we had been doing with balance and distribution up to this point. And back in February, we looked at the 5 years up to and including 2017. And now this short presentation here basically takes us forward from 17 out the 5 years through the end of this fiscal plan into 2023. So I'll jump in right here. The first slide gives the dollar amount by area and by ward graphically. So you can kind of take a look and see how we're doing across the different areas and across the ward. And the slide right after this gives a little more of a detailed breakdown specifically by fiscal year. On the very right-hand side of the slide, you'll see the percentage total with Ward 1 at about 28%, Ward 2 at about 33%, and Ward 3 coming in at just over 32%. I'll explain the bottom portion of this slide is basically a collection of projects where we could not specifically identify either the year or the specific ward in which the project was going to be completed. We did have a number of those relating to stormwater that involved emergency repairs, greenscaping, that type of thing, where determinations are still being made as to the exact fiscal year and ward. Sidewalk repair, we have something similar where we had $450,000 per year for public requests for service, and an additional $100,000 per year for ADA ramps that could not be specifically identified at this point in time as to ward. And finally, under parks, we had Amen and Provence Park, which are regional parks, and so again, they're not associated with a specific ward either.
Because they're outside the city.
The next slide, I believe you already saw this slide last week during the Vital Streets presentation. Again, just shows the balance of the Vital Streets projects in FY19. This slide here gives you a little additional breakdown, what I touched on for the sidewalk repair fund. I think you already saw the sources and uses statement to the right last week, but along the left, it'll give a little more detail as to exactly how the sidewalk repair funds are being allocated. We have it divided between systematic and connectivity, and you can see in 19, we're splitting $600,000 three ways, $200,000 per ward, and then an additional connectivity going to 3 Mile Road in Ward 2. Ward 2 is receiving the connectivity award in both 19 and 20, and then we move into Ward 3 for 21 through 23, and again, the specific projects are detailed right there on the left. This next slide moves into the Parks Department and gives the total dollars invested from all sources, that's both city funds and additional leverage funds by ward. So Ward 1, we have about 35%, Ward 2, 27%, Ward 3, 34%, and then we're pushing about $600,000 that either span multiple wards or fell into that other type category at the bottom of the previous slide. This slide right here shows by fiscal year the number of parks that are going to be receiving investment over the next coming years. Whereas the slide directly after this is the actual park count as it currently exists. So Ward 1 we have 25 parks, Ward 2 32, and Ward 3 18 parks at this point in time. Finally, you just saw these slides, but I'll just briefly walk through it. I put it in here just for support. Again, the breakdown of the cemetery investment. And lastly, a little more detail for you on the stormwater investments. I wish we could have had a few less to be determined, but again, I think that's just kind of the nature of this type of investment when you're dealing with emergency repairs or green infrastructure implementation. And obviously you can see kind of in the lower left, the Knapp's Crossing project does provide some significant skewing into Ward 2. If there's any interest in terms of parks detail, I didn't want to bore you with 3 pages just loaded with numbers. I do have the parks investment broken out by individual park, by fiscal year and ward, if there's any interest in that as well. Thank you.
All right, commissioners, any questions about that? Yeah, go ahead, Commissioner.
I think that this is great to show the various wards and how the recent bond and tax extensions that have been made and how those dollars are spent. And since I became a commissioner, I have been advocating for equity across all wards, and in these particular areas, it has come to fruition. So I'm glad to see that you all demonstrated the level of equity that went into parks and in roads and in sidewalks. And now we just need to take the next step to bring equity to some of the other investments that we have across the city.
I agree, Commissioner, and I'd be happy to expand the scope of this process going forward.
Thanks.
Mayor?
Thanks, Commissioner. Commissioner?
Yeah, I would like to piggyback on those comments. I was going to talk a little bit about streetlights, and I'll mention that briefly here because Prior to my getting on the commission in 2010, 2009, there was conversation about streetlights because our systems were failing and all over the city they have been. Resulting, I know, I've had lots of complaints, not initially about changing lights, and then it became whole circuits that were failing. Car larcenies were going up in neighborhoods, and of course there's potential for accidents. So I do think it's really critical. But as we talk about this equity concern that Commissioner Lanier has been bringing up today, I'm wondering if we want to have an opportunity at some point to have a conversation about that and not necessarily look at wards, but prioritize differently around quality of life and what it takes. I think every neighborhood wants to be safe and clean and green. We should feel comfortable going and moving through every neighborhood in the city. They all have different characteristics which are interesting, whether it's a Heritage Hill or one of our outlying areas that is more suburban in nature, whether it's workforce housing that was developed. They're all interesting, they're all unique, and we ought to be looking at amenities in those neighborhoods and how to make sure that they all feel safe, they're clean and they're green, and just having a conversation that might be a little bit different about this. This isn't competition between wards, this is really making sure that every area of our city has what it needs to thrive and have a good quality of life. So I just wanted to throw that out there because I think maybe we're looking at it through a lens that we ought to rethink.
Yeah, well, what I was sitting here thinking about is also, I wonder if it'd be valuable for us to take a closer look too at the neighborhoods of focus and the 17 census tracts, which actually overlaps in the first and the third ward, where we know that we have families with significant needs.
Yep, comes down to people.
And so I do think it's worth a larger conversation, and I'm going to recommend, well, I'll just do it now. One is for Eric to meet with Commissioners Lanier and Allen again to talk about investment. I know that conversation was started, but it would.
Yep.
I'd like another conversation about that, and then also for us to take a closer look at those 17 census tracts.
Yeah, I think a lot of the work that maybe this is about has probably already been done.
Well, whether it's lighting or even the investment in bus stops and sidewalk and ADA compliance. So anyway, Commissioner Allen.
As we all know, this, because of my decision to step down, this is my last budget session. So, and I really desperately wanted to stay on through this. I've not missed any of the budget sessions, and I don't intend to because this is very important to me. So I do, in the context of this conversation about equity, and you all know my history, you know, particularly in the third ward. It's been 20 years of doing community development, and I've been very passionate about it. I appreciate the equity when we look at these capital investments, but we're talking parks, we're talking streets, we're talking stormwater. Those are things that a city should do anyways, and I'm not discounting that, and they should be done equitably, so that's important.
Right, their infrastructure.
There are, however, certain projects that are being, and this is not intentional, I'm not suggesting that, and this kind of came out of that protest that we did at this focus meeting that we had, is there are projects, however, that we do a great job finding ways to layer. So we have Vital Streets, and we have, you know, and then we have the DDA puts their money in, and what it creates is it creates impact. Okay, and so, you know, when you look at what's happening on Bridge, the near area of Bridge Street, when you look at what's happened on Leonard, and you look at, you know, the massive revitalization of these business districts and whatnot. You know, when I look at my business districts in the third ward, and I look at Madison and Hall, and I look at Franklin and Eastern, and I look at Wealthy and Eastern, all I see happening right now is low-income housing tax credit projects. So what we're setting ourselves up for is failure, where we're continuing to concentrate property, which is what's happened historically for the past, as long as I've ever lived in this city. If you wanted to buy a low-income house, you were relegated to a low-income housing census tract, because that was where the strategic target area is, which is where the HUD funding went. So, you know, what I'm encouraging and what I'm asking city staff to do, these great minds that think creatively, is think long-term about impact in these neighborhoods. What I want equity on is I want equity not on the numbers, but on the impact. That's real, and Eric and I and Sunita, we've had some great discussions about potential things that could be done in the third ward that would create impact. So we now have the Southtown SID. They're working hard to get their feet in the ground. You know, that's the start. So what can the city do? And I know the 50,000 and the other money come up is to do that, but really the intentionality needs to be around impact. And that's what I wanted to leave this conversation with. So when we start thinking about this infrastructure, what can we do to create impact and to create market rate things to happen in some of these neighborhoods that creates jobs in some of these neighborhoods, and not just, you know, so you look at Eastern Avenue, ICCF's doing a multi-million-dollar low-income housing tax credit project right across from the street from Eastern Avenue CRC. You know, Link, you know, did a nice job, but it's all low-income housing on that 4-story building on Hall and Madison, you know, so those are the kind of things that I really want city staff to be looking at.
Yeah, thank you. All right, thank you.
Thank you, very much appreciate the feedback.
Appreciate it. All right, next item.
Scott, could you hit the next slide before you walk away? You might want to stay there a minute just in case.
Sure.
All right, so this is the general administration budget, so we're switching gears. And as I have talked to you or written to you in the past, there is a interest in investing more in the promotional advertising work that's being done by Experience Grand Rapids. And we have 2 members of the commission who are on the board of Experience Grand Rapids and have been working with them along with City Manager Sundstrom to put together a package that would actually invest in equity and diversity. And so the proposal would be to increase the amount above the $50,000 from the promotional millage to $100,000 to help Experience Grand Rapids and actually leverage Experience Grand Rapids in doing additional work in those areas. And the areas that they're interested in doing are promoting employment in that field by creating a program at Ottawa Hills High School similar to programs that have been created at Innovation Central and other schools that would provide pathways to employment in hospitality management, also recruiting from historically black universities, and doing other activities under the guidance of Angela Nelson to bring more diversity to the work that they're doing. So I would recommend that we do this and that we add it to, as we do final changes to the budget, and would invite Commissioner Jones or Mayor Bliss to add to that.
Yeah, I'll defer to Commissioner Jones. He serves on the Diversity and Inclusion Committee and the Board of Experience Grand Rapids, and I know has worked on this. And Commissioners, just so you know, these conversations actually started about a year ago with, at the time, City Manager Sundstrom, and there was some disconnect in communication as he retired, and so we were under the impression that this was already going to be in the budget because of conversations that were had probably about a year ago with Greg. So Commissioner Jones.
Yep, thank you, Mayor, and thank you, Eric. I know that, as Eric's mentioned, we've actually had some conversations about this, as the Mayor just alluded to, for some time, and I actually was able to go, I think it was last year, maybe it was this year, I'm getting my times mixed up, but was actually able to go out of town to the DC area to see an example of a couple of schools that have really centered on or focused more on hospitality sciences, and in particular in communities of color. And so the folks at Experience Grand Rapids are very committed. They are investing heavily within their own, and they're also tapping into other private institutions and organizations around the city, and have asked if the city would be open to supporting it as well. Again, this is a conversation that's been taking place for a while, and it also speaks to ultimately creating a more ethnically diverse workforce in that space at the management level. I think right now, historically, we've seen that, and we can even see this through a historical perspective, that a lot of the work that's been done, or quite a bit of the work that's done, or that's the jobs that are occupied by people of color in the industry are the very entry-level positions. And so this is a focus on a career path. And so I'm very much in support of it. As the mayor mentioned, I also serve on the diversity committee for Experience Grand Rapids as well as the board. So,
Any questions, commissioners?
Good, okay. So that will be included in the final fund statement. So let's move on then to CDBG.
And in our packet, there's a page on Parks Forestry
I forgot
Sustainability
it.
Subsidy.
Thank
Do we
you
need
for
to touch
reminding
on
me
that?
of that. Sure. So Scott and I and Tom's in the back to talk about this if necessary. So phase 1 is well underway, and that was the A3 that you approved. And what this does is provide for funding for the next 5 years for phase 2. So we can get our tree inventory on an asset management framework. And so this, along with the street lighting investment, would take care of 2 more assets, and which would, I think, get us to about the point of having all of our assets covered under some form of asset management plan.
Okay, great, thank you.
Now we'll move on to CD.
All right, Community Development, Connie Bohatch.
Hello. My voice is improving.
Good.
Good. Okay.
Connie
Yeah.
with no voice, so.
No. Yeah, try to get me to stop talking, right? So, community development, our mission is building great neighborhoods, and we do this through a variety of ways, which providing direct services and programs, as well as having community partnerships. And as you're aware of this morning, that is a testament to how we work in partnership with the community because of the allocation of the resources that you just did today. But we, in essence, have 3 focus areas: grants management, housing rehabilitation, and code compliance, that really, in essence, operate as 3 separate departments. They're very distinct functions with separate budgets and a whole different operating staff. So, excuse me, grants management. The budget for grants management is approximately $1.2 million, but that includes the grant writer. That is the only position in our department that is actually supported by the general operating fund. All the other operating support comes from the administrative dollars from our federal grants. And as you can see, this slide, it says approximately $6 million annually, but actually it's closer to $7 million, depending on the sources of funds that we have in at the time. Today, you just allocated over $6.6 million through the federal formula grants. And then we may also have, from time to time, federal competitive awards, like the Supporting Male Survivors of Violence and the Lead Hazard Control programs. We have philanthropic awards from time to time as well. Currently, we have grants for the eviction prevention program, the project that we're doing through the 61st District Court with the DHHS and the Salvation Army. Overall, contract administration and loan servicing within that office, we have 40 subrecipient agreements with and assisted entities or professional services contracts. Right now, we've launched a new online services for reporting their programmatic and financial reports using Acela. So thanks to having Phil Shaftsman and Joanna Schulte in our offices, they've come up with a process to be able to stop sending paper back and forth through the mail and do it all online. We also have taken advantage of the clerk's new digital contract routing and signing via MinuteTrack. So all of those helping us to digitize the work that we do, because as you are aware, with all these federal grants, there's lots and lots of paperwork. We have 717 active loans through our various rehab programs, whether that's led or through the owner-occupied traditional rehab program. The grant writing services are provided citywide. So Kim Dixon does that work, and so any department who might want some support in doing that, she helps them out. And sometimes we also assist with some community initiatives where they might need some expertise. And then, as you're aware, we recently relaunched the HAF program, our Home Buyer Assistance Fund, through grants management. The federal funds that we receive.
I'm sorry, can I
Yeah.
ask a question about that? Since we made the adjustments to the Home Buyer Assistance Fund, have we seen an increase in utilization?
So it took us a little time to get back up and running because we had to change some of the rules and the paperwork associated with that. Right now, we have 9 lenders who have been approved, and we have memorandums of understanding with them. And so we're just kind of getting that back in the pipeline.
And are we going to work on getting communication out about that program then once we're ready to go
Yeah,
and take additional?
we've already started doing that, but we started with the lenders first because they typically are the ones who are bringing us the clients, but we'll work on a more general campaign in terms of the community now as well.
Okay, with our nonprofit partners?
Sure.
Okay, Commissioner?
Sorry.
Connie, you mentioned, I'm sorry, you mentioned lenders. So if somebody wants to get the that down payment assistance, they can only get a mortgage through one of the participating lenders?
Yes, and they have to, and we actually approve them.
Okay. I did not know that. Well, I'm just suggesting that what I'm reading and what the industry is showing right now is most lenders are moving away from residential mortgage lending, particularly to low-income clients. And it's more like the larger, like Quicken Loans and some of those loan companies that are doing most of the loans to people, that would qualify for that. So I'm just.
I don't know, we have 9 lenders signed up, so we can let you know what we're seeing.
It's not your fault, I'm just suggesting that that's.
Well, I wonder if we should reach out to Quicken Loans.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah,
I mean, we have relationships with them.
We can look, we need to make sure that we're also, the reason that we do that is we want to make sure that we're protecting that low-income buyer as well, and because there's certain requirements and things that need to be met. Make sure they don't get into a bad situation. Okay, so one thing to know about, so again, you went through this process, the tail end of the process today regarding the funding allocation process, but that starts out with our Consolidated Housing and Community Development Plan. The 5-year plan that we have in place is your community development strategy and how you allocate your funds on an annual basis. The current plan was done as a regional plan in partnership with Kent County and the City of Wyoming because they're required to have 5-year plans as well. And the current plan covers July 1, 2016 through June 30th of 2021, and that we will be in process to start working on a new plan actually sooner than we think. Because it has to happen in 2 stages. We're required to have an analysis of impediments to fair housing, and that will need to be completed by the end of 2019, because we need that information to be able to move forward and roll into the actual consolidated plan in the end. And so in 2020 then, there will be a process where we look at an assessment of community needs and develop the intended outcomes, that framework that we traditionally have used called the Neighborhood Investment Plan. And so there'll be a need for community engagement, focus groups, and we always try to pull on plans that are in place. So for example, we've traditionally used this, the planning department's master planning process. A lot of times those activities result in a lot of things that are put on a parking lot, put over on the parking lot because they really don't deal with the land use issues that the planning department is focusing on. And so we take all that information and make sure that that somehow gets looked at and considered in our process. And then we also try to look at any other priorities. So for example, if there's an infrastructure task force report, if there's a lead task force, for example, the Kent County or the mayor's kicking off hers, we would look at all these other city priorities and plans that are in place and try to incorporate that into that plan so that when you're allocating resources, you're truly trying to address issues, even though it's a small amount of money, that are truly the priorities of the City Commission and the community.
Mayor.
Commissioner?
So, Connie, sorry for interrupting, but this particular issue is one of the main reasons why I want to see this come back today. So I mostly just want to make a comment on it. For those of you who've never seen the actual plan, and you probably have, it's bigger than this budget. It's a Herculean task that Connie and her staff have to do. And they start, as she said, years before the actual start date. So when you did the plan that started on July 1, 2016, I would dare say you probably started in 14 and 15 to get it done. So I'd like us all to think about, since in the last 2 years, what we've seen in the housing market and how fast it's changed. But we're stuck with a plan and I'll use that word, it's not Connie's fault, it's the system being the way it is. So I would encourage us as we begin this process to do a new plan, to maybe find ways to make it flexible enough that gives Connie and her staff the ability to make changes, because you almost can't go back to HUD and make a change to your plan, because it would take a year and a half to do that. And by the time the issue that you're asking to have changed probably isn't no longer even an issue to a year and a half from now. So, and I'm just making a comment. You can respond to it or not, but I really think that plan needs to be made as much as HUD will allow to be as fluid as possible to react to market trends that are changing rapidly, and I think continuing to change. And the last thing that I'll say is I get asked this question a lot. Are we seeing a bubble when it comes to housing prices? And I contend, and I've talked to several people, including folks high up in the GRAR, that we're not necessarily seeing a bubble. What we're seeing is a market correction. That if you read the national studies, our housing, in spite of the angst that our people who live in this region are feeling, our housing is still underpriced based on what it costs to construct it and what its value is. So on a side note, we have an income issue, but that's a whole other discussion that doesn't relate to this. So this plan really is what drives everything. We approved that this morning. I just would encourage everybody that's involved in the commission to encourage this new plan as it gets developed to be as fluid as possible. It's very, very important. It's vitally important.
Yeah, well said, Commissioner.
Just a note about that, it does get frustrating because for a lot of the data sets that are in the plan, we're required to use census data. And so by the time you get the census data, it's usually, once it's cleaned and all that, it's 5 years in. So you're already kind of working with that old data. So wherever we can to try to give more of a current conditions, we use the ACS estimates, but that's not necessarily what HUD will use for all of their methods that they bring information to us or how we have to report. But at the end of the day, that's also why when we bring those outcomes, that framework to you, they are somewhat broad, so that we can make adjustments and fund a variety of things to get to that outcome as opposed to very specific measurements, just to try to get more flexibility. So those are some of our strategies that we've developed over the years.
And Commissioners, I know we've all talked about this before, but there are real limitations with census data and ACS data across the board, even the ability to have annual data to compare progress to or a lack of progress, but also to dig down to a granular level to neighborhood-specific data to show that if some of the programming we're doing is actually having an impact. And so there's a larger conversation about that in our community. The availability and access to data and its reliability, but also relying on sometimes years old census data or even ACS data, which is just a fraction of the data that they collect. So we could have a whole conversation about data.
So what you approved today was our annual action plan. So in that 5-year period, every year, we have to tell them specifically now what we're funding and what we're planning to accomplish with those funds. And then that gets wrapped up at the end of every year with what's called a consolidated annual performance and evaluation report, known as the CAPER, and then we report to HUD. So a lot of paperwork.
But Connie, I'm sorry, can I say one more thing? This was brought up at one of our prior commission meetings, I think one of our budget meetings. There was a question asked specifically about the upcoming census. Lou Canfield and Eric followed up on that, and we will have a presentation coming up in July or August, and we'll be updated about what we're doing locally as well as with other partners around making sure that we're teed up to do the best that we can to have an accurate census collection as we move forward. So just FYI, that was not lost, and we are planning for a City Commission update on that.
Mayor, currently it's planned for August.
Thank you.
The Housing Rehabilitation Office, our operating budget is approximately $625,000 with a construction budget of $1.6, and our outreach budget is $500,000. That's really dependent upon the sources of funds that we have. And I'd like to note that that $625,000 is wrapping in our project management costs. So that's not administrative dollars necessarily, that's actual construction management as well. So if you were to just take that out, it's our actual administrative costs are about 15% in relation to this budget. So we operate two core programs, which is the Housing Rehabilitation Program for homeowner rehabilitation projects. We try to do at least 45 annually with an average unit cost of $18,000. We do have a partnership that I'm not sure that you're aware of that we've had for quite some time with Mercantile Bank so that we can access the Federal Home Loan Bank of Indianapolis. They have a neighborhood improvement program fund that allows us to access some grant funds. So we try to get projects in. The problem is that source of funding comes up very quickly and for a very short time frame. But over the years, we've had 74 loans or grants through that process, totaling $706,000. So it's a significant ability to then have additional money going to a project that, in essence, doesn't affect a loan. The lead hazard control program is for homeowner and rental properties. We've had 7 competitively awarded grants since 2003, totaling about $19 million. Our program actually launched in 2004, and you can see the numbers there of the number of housing units that we've done specifically through that program to date, which is 1,353. Those programs are not just intended to just do lead paint remediation. It's also intended to do outreach and education regarding lead and cleaning practices, and also training professionals to do the work. So it's a combination of tools to address lead issues in our community. We also have a lead safe housing registry that wherever possible, we combine this program with our traditional housing rehabilitation program so that we can maximize the resources. So you can see why that number is a little different than the one on the first line that says housing units made lead safe. It's higher because we include our housing rehab projects as well. There was a note, I think, in the Kent County Task Force report that I wanted to mention today about the fact that these units are not re-inspected. It has dates that are very old. The dates that are on that in that registry identifies when the project was completed and when the project passed a clearance test for that. We use both interim controls and abatement methods. So there is routine maintenance that has to occur to ensure that the lead stays out of a home. But that's a date of when they were inspected and cleared and certified that they were cleared from lead.
Great. Commissioner Kelly has a question.
Yeah, I just was curious, Connie, in our outreach, have we reached out to like the paint companies, John Seven, Sherwin-Williams, and so on? Do they do anything to help? People
No,
are probably
we have
wanting
not
to buy
done that.
supplies.
No.
Just wondered if that might help.
And then we do have a new program that's come online through the Medicaid Children's Health Insurance Program, where we have $1.5 million, but that's to address, that is specifically to do full abatement for children who are enrolled in that program. And it's for all of Kent County. So we are working with our partners over at Kent County and through the health department. The health department actually identifies the household that we will deal with, and it's a full abatement, so it's a much higher cost and less units that will be produced. I was asked, I think, by Commissioner Jones or Lanier, or both of you, to try to come up with some numbers of if money were no object, what would it take to address lead? So Doug Steck can take the credit for this. He worked hard to try to figure this out for us. This is based on information that we used to submit our lead application, lead hazard control program application in 2016 in terms of the base assumptions. And so you can tell that if you look at the map, if you can see it well, that's the target area for our program currently. And it comprises the zip codes that I think you have concerns about, 49507 and 3 and 6, and 04. So it's a little bit of all of those, but primarily you can see that 07 is definitely covered. And so if you look at that first box, you can see that if we were to, based on that assumption and what we believe the unit cost is for addressing that issue, it's $388 million, give or take, right? Because it's an estimate. And if we were to look citywide based on, again, this is all based on the pre-1978 housing stock, that it would be $634 million. So that's our best guess. And if you were to look at, so there's actually two figures that are, so if you go below that, then we talk about if we were to try to eliminate it to really eliminate it, which is using full abatement. Which means a much higher cost, probably around $40,000 per unit. You're talking at $1 to $2 billion.
Commissioner?
Connie, thank you for pulling these numbers together, and I just want to add that this is based on the age of the house, I'm assuming, and then so that if I lived in a house that was at whatever age that would be critical in this
1978,
before 1978, and I've already done my own lead abatement, so changing windows and siding and things of that nature, you could potentially be counting my house in this.
Could be,
Because
yes.
it's based on just
Right.
the stock that we have, so.
So what we used was, again, some assumptions that were made for a grant application where the base was 66,000 units in the city that were pre-1978. And basically, there was an identification that 40,000 of those units would be high risk for lead, and 20,000 may be low to moderate, and then 6,000 potentially something like you've just described. Someone's taking care of it or it's not an issue.
Okay, thank you.
And Connie, are we able to extrapolate out of the potential high-risk units, how many of them have children living in them? Like, I think about my house. My house was built in 1951. It's me and my dog. I mean, I'm not concerned because I don't have children in my home.
Right.
Both of my neighbors are single individuals, you know, so I'm just curious, like, is there a way to extrapolate, okay, out of these high risk, where are the children who are most at risk of being poisoned?
I think if we were to look at some type of ACS estimate, because they often have the population there, but based on this, no. I don't know if Doug, do you have a comment on that?
I don't have any. I know where the data is, and you probably find it from the ACS or census data. Maybe 20% of the.
Yeah. Well, and I'm sure all of us have read the information even about how individuals are choosing, a higher percentage of individuals are choosing not to have children, and so the percentage of families without children is actually growing. And so I'm just curious because that to me is where you need to target your resources, is where you have the highest risk of children being lead poisoned.
And the argument on the other side
we'll
also
put that on our
is
to-do list.
that then you may choose to sell your home, and it may become a family home.
Right.
As opposed to,
Right.
So
Yeah,
there's arguments on both sides.
Yeah.
Okay. Code compliance, so that is the third area of operation, and our budget is approximately $4.25 million, which does include an allocation from the CDBG program. There is a full cost recovery with a combination of fees and through the CDBG program. But you can see that the CDBG is not that full $1.3 million. It's less because there's about $500,000 a year that gets returned to the CDBG program as program income. So, there's a net there. Housing cases and blight monitoring cases in 2017, decreased over 16. And it's my understanding from being involved with code enforcement that the blight monitoring list that we have right now is the lowest it's been in history. So while it's not zero, there's making great progress. Our trash reduction program that has increased 14% from 2016. I think that really has to do more with the fact that we had seasonal employees before, and in 2016 in particular, we had a really hard time getting and keeping seasonal employees to do that work. Last year, through that shared partnership with Public Services, we have maintenance assistants who work the season for us and then go over there to do snow plowing and other things in the winter. And so that was the first time that we had that actually in place.
Connie, can I ask a question about the blight monitoring? Out of those 234 open cases, are those properties primarily vacant?
They are all vacant.
They're all vacant,
Yes.
100% of them. So, walk us through what being on the blight monitoring.
Oh, there's a whole list, and I don't know that off the
Can you
top
just
of my
email it
head.
to us? I think all of
Yeah.
us would be interested in that. Because to me, we talked about this a little bit when we received and talked about the compendium.
Yeah.
That word. We talked about how there's an opportunity because we have hundreds of vacant homes, and if we could be aggressive about trying to get those redeveloped, that potentially could create housing opportunities. And then also we talked about vacant properties, and can we come up with a plan to target those properties for potential infill. So I still think those are two opportunities.
Sure, and keep in mind that these are vacant, but they're the worst of the worst.
Right.
We don't have a really good number for vacant properties in total, but Phil Shasma did do some work in March, looking at putting together some indicators for vacancy. And he looked at water consumption and shut-off data, our code compliance cases, and vacant property registrations, because you are supposed to, by ordinance, register your property when it's vacant. And so by looking at all that data, he determined at that point that there was an indicator, right? We can't prove that they were all vacant, but about 1,700 properties that had at least one vacancy indicator.
So Phil and Connie have done really good work in providing kind of this base information. You might also remember in the compendium, there was the list of vacant properties and vacant homes. So we're looking at both those lists and using business intelligence techniques, trying to sort through them to see, to get them in sets. So we can say, okay, these properties are owned by this entity, or these might have these characteristics, so we can sort them and investigate them better. So we're working to try to get to the point where we can take informed action on the ones that are easiest to address the most rapidly and move forward that way.
So out of the potential 1,700 vacant properties, do we have a sense of how many are bank-owned?
That's what we're trying to find out. So, because this is the first, to Phil and Connie's credit, this is like the first time we've had this list. So, in one place. So now that we have this with the data characteristics that we have, now we want to analyze what those are to put them together in sets.
Okay.
And you can see where a large portion of them are actually rental when you look at the next page. So we have, so this is just an update on the status of our residential rental certification program. Single family, two family, multifamily. You can see that we're in the 80% of all the units are certified for single family, 85% for two family, and 94% for multifamily. And then over you can see what the vacancy is. You're not required to have an inspection if the property is vacant. So those are the ones that we know that are vacant at this time. Sometimes it's just being held because while they're doing repairs or something before they bring someone new in, and sometimes it could be out there for a while.
With this market, I'm astonished that we have that many
That many what?
vacant. That's why I just wonder how many are bank owned without us, they're not.
Well,
local.
not just bank owned, but there's also a very large number that are owned by
Investors.
investors that bought them in large portfolios that they're just sitting on. They might not even know they own them.
I would
So
think-
for example, we at the Land Bank tried to participate in the purchase of some underperforming loan portfolios from Fannie Mae. And you had to buy, you had to have $50 million cash in the bank, and you had to buy $150 million worth of loans in a 7-state area to participate. That's Fannie and Freddie and HUD doing that. And so a lot of these type of homes are probably in those portfolios, and these large companies buy them. They don't even know literally don't even know they have them.
I gotta believe there's a ton of code violations on these properties.
There can be and there can't be. I've talked about this before, but that they'll do
So
the
those
minimum of having somebody come mow and.
Right, so
just-
those that are vacant that have significant issues
That he's
should
on
be
that.
on that blight list. right? That's the 234. As Commissioner Allen says, the others are probably having a company who's coming and mowing and at least doing the basic things.
Well, I think the challenge, with some of these too, is there's no incentive to fix them up in some regards. And so it's whether or not, and who knows if some of this stuff's even legal, but looking at something like a vacancy tax, or I know there's some places that have went to more of a, right now most of our property tax value is weighted more towards the improvements of the property, but to shift the burden to the actual value of the land and less on the improvements so that people are incentivized to build on property and use them rather than have them sit vacant.
Is part of the analysis of these properties looking at what our options are to do exactly what Commissioner O'Connor just said?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear exactly what he said, but yes, we will be looking at what kind of alternatives we have. Some communities actually charge, our blight monitoring fees that we have for just going out and monitoring every so many days, and if there's been no improvements, we send them an invoice. And in our community, people are not that get those invoices usually are not happy about those, but if you look across even the state of Michigan or across the country, those fees are minimal compared to what other communities charge. And that's a tool that they've used in other communities, was hitting with them with very high fees for letting properties sit there in abandonment and especially in distressed areas.
Why don't we look at that?
We should.
Or are we looking at that? Or like
So
Mr.
those
O'Connor
are
said, a
fees.
vacancy
Those are
fee?
fees that are set by the city commission. And in the past, this commission may feel differently, but in the past, that was not desired to have those fees that high. If you would like, we could give you some information on fee comparisons
I would
for
like
that particular.
Yeah, I think I'd like, that could be part of a larger thing, a larger study of how do we, because what we're going to do is turn these properties back into usable properties that are being used, that are
Right.
that are being lived in, because that's what we need. So there are a variety of ways of doing that. This may be one of the levers to use, but I think it's going to take a lot of tools because I think we have a lot of different cases here. That's my suspicion until I see exactly what we have.
Yeah, I'm just
That it's
talking,
gonna-
I'm focusing just on those, on the blight monitoring, because those are
Yeah, it's going to.
significant.
I think it's going to take a lot of different tools to get these back into use. But this could be a very good tool.
Well, I appreciate that, and I'm glad work is being done. I personally would like to see in the state of Michigan comparative data on both blight monitoring fees as well as any cities that have what Commissioner O'Connor referred to as some type of vacancy fee. I'd like to better understand what other cities are doing to encourage and kind of push the owners of these properties to get them turned around.
For both commercial and residential.
Yes.
Connie, didn't you just attend a conference on this?
Sorry?
Did you just attend a conference on this
Yeah,
topic?
we went to the Center for Community Progress, just had their annual conference in Milwaukee. So a few code compliance staff and myself attended the Reclaiming Vacant Properties Conference. And I can say that a lot of communities are using much bigger sticks to deal with it, as opposed to, the friendly side. When I talked to, I know that we think that this is a real problem for our community, but when I talk to other communities, I have to say that when I said, it's under 2,000, and based on the number of properties and our population, everyone said, oh, you don't have a problem. So, but that's not
All perspective.
Right, that's not how we feel in our community, and so we discussed that. But anyhow, so there were some good
and I'll
things
just
that we
look to
learned
my
there,
colleagues. Would you find that information helpful as well?
Yep.
Okay, so yes, can you
Okay,
work on that and send it
absolutely.
to us?
We'll do that first.
And our final slide here has to do with our code compliance department initiatives. So one of the priorities that I know that you have is to reduce the negative impacts on unintended consequences. And so we will be working with the 311 customer service liaison. We really believe that having some case management services, which are true case management services for certain clients that we have or customers that we have, is critical to gaining compliance. Inspectors do the best that they can, and we have a whole network of organizations that we deal with, that we partner with, but they can only do so much as inspectors, and so it really takes someone else, I think, to do a little more personal hand-holding at times to help get them through and navigate systems. We also have the Grand Rapids Area Hoarding Task Force that continues to do good work. Excuse me. And it seems like they keep building more momentum and steam. And we're going to continue to work on enhancing our community partnerships. We do have partnerships with neighborhood associations currently that we work with regularly, 13 nonprofits, 2 universities, 2 professional organizers, 4 government agencies, and 8 other city departments. So the code enforcement work that we're doing right now is not done in its isolation, and it's not just about issuing orders. It's trying to solve some problems as well and get to solutions, but we're going to work harder at how we might make some changes and build stronger partnerships. One of the things that when we just talked about the lack of data, Scott Baker from the code compliance staff has worked to find the Ptolemy solution in terms of a data analysis and visualization tool. We've showcased that with Becky Jo and her team, and I think they'll be coming to you shortly with an agenda item for us to actually get that system in place here at the city, because it will allow us to actually look at community data, look at data, put our city data in it from all the various departments, and as well as to look at it at a property level. So it's very interesting that you can no longer then we would have to rely on just the census data for a few things, but we would actually have our own data regarding code compliance issues, building permits, water data, all in one place that we can see as a citywide system and start to zero in on parcels in a neighborhood and look at what the conditions are. So it's a little more, allows us to be more predictive in nature of what's going on in the community and help us hopefully make better decisions and build strategies around dealing with properties and things of that nature. We also want to continue working on our customer service and in fact even considering how do we rebrand code compliance. It used to be called code enforcement, now it's code compliance. That was, I think, the thought of being a little more friendly, but I think we still need to work a little harder of how does it seem even more friendly. We'll be working with the communications office. Amy Snow's offered to help us with looking at some of our communications, to see if we can do a better job there. And we have been working for quite some time now on standard operating procedures. One of the challenges is that when you have codes that you're enforcing, although things are written in code, it is there is room for to make judgment calls in terms of so the code might say something, but it leaves an area for interpretation. And so we've been trying to work hard to make sure that when there's areas that need to be interpreted, that all the inspectors are interpreting things the same way. So we've been putting into place standard operating procedures for that. And then, of course, just continue to increase our community education and outreach. Eric Jordan does a really good job with this. He's got a partnership with and works with Commissioner Kelly with the colleges and universities, and our group has put together an off-campus living brochure that gets out to campuses every year to make sure that kids that are coming in to live and are going to start living in apartments know and understand what the rules and their responsibilities are of being good neighbors. To make sure that they're not getting into any nuisance violations and things of that nature. So that's one example, and there's many others that we'll continue to do and find new opportunities for.
Great, thank you. Commissioners, I'll start with Commissioner Kelly.
Yeah, you brought it up, Connie. But it would be great if we could continue to, I don't know that we need to meet every year, but to continue to get that, those players at each of those colleges and universities, that information, because they do update their website. And it really does help to get college students to do, that prevention up front, so that they're aware that they have to take the trash out, they have to shovel, all those things, and just to keep that relationship going. I appreciate that.
I agree.
Thanks.
Good.
All right, any other questions or comments, commissioners? All right, thank you. Thank you.
Okay, so you have a choice to make now. We can take a minute for a break and come back, or we keep going.
No, I think we should keep going, and we can all take a break if we need it.
All right, good. So the next up is Mr. Almonte talking about the competitive assessment with EMA.
Thomas coming, Eric. So, I thought this agenda was going to be light enough for the commission to have more time for discussion. So, I don't know how many hours we've spent, in discussing the budget, but then we have 20 minutes for the commission to kind of respond to and weigh in on. And I just think that's a bit light for
Sure.
all of what's been digested.
Well, yes, it could be light. And I thought maybe we would be a little further along in the program by now. And we'd have a little more time. So we
Okay.
spent a lot of time with questions and answers on capital. So that took more time than I imagined. We also are trying to reserve time on the 29th for that very purpose. But we have, it's a crowded agenda because there are lots of things that we'd like to tell you. I think most of the topics on the 29th are quick hitters. So we can get in, get out, and try to reserve as much time as possible then. And if we need additional time, we could have time on July 5th. But as we get closer and closer and closer, Jeff is looking at me with his eyes askance back there, that we have to wrap things up. So we'll try to balance any questions you have with, and time for those and discussion with trying to get done too. Okay?
Okay, and then, so just a quick follow-up. So we've talked about the transformation plan twice now. So this would be the third time. What potentially could be up for a discussion regarding the transformation plan?
This is your last clear chance to say, yep, it's good. No, it's not. So it doesn't have to be a long discussion. It could take a second.
Okay,
So-
so it's just, if there aren't any additional changes, it's just having the conversation about the content?
Yes, this plan reflects the interest that you've expressed to us so far. So if you have, and if we've heard you correctly, this should be a very short discussion.
Can I ask a follow-up question on this? I was going to ask when we got to that point. What is the urgency of finalizing the transformation plan before the budget is approved? Or can this wait and we can have a larger conversation about it? I personally feel like I feel like, well, I think I've already explained that. I think there's a lot in the transformation plan. And I guess help me understand why it needs to be a part of the budget process. Or can it be separate and we take another look at it in July?
Sure. Well, of course, we can do whatever you wish. So what the interest has been to, when we publish our final fiscal plan, they have the transformation plan in the final fiscal plan. And so, Jeff, I don't know what the schedule is for publishing that plan, but you will usually get that out in July or August.
Usually later August, yeah.
So it's important, I think, to keep the transformation plan linked to the budget, so that we don't lose sight of what we're doing with the value streams and why we're investing in them. So it's been kind of taking us from where we were with phase 3 to phase 4 and trying to include it in the budget if we could. So and we could always amend it later. That's a possibility too. So we can go either way you wish.
Okay. All right.
So, Tom, are you ready?
And Mayor, Commissioner, I'm just going to be brief and going through this information. This was in your packet. I know Eric included this in his letter too. And this is just to give you an overview of the work that we have done. I want to say thank you to the team and commend the work that they have completed. This was a notion of how can we share resources within our service group, and they actually are beginning to do that, and it's very encouraging to see that. Just to remind you, our service crew include 5 departments. One of those, as you know, lighting, signs, and signals, has been now divided into 2 units, and they are now, the lighting portion of that is with ESD, and the traffic and signal portion of it is with Mobility GR. I also want to just let you know that we also included in our service group the engineering department. Most of the work that is done out of this department comes out of our service group anyway, so it just makes sense to align that with the service group. The work was based on asking just a simple question: can we maximize resources by utilizing resources in a different way? And we began that journey. So we, as you know, we hire EMA, And through that work with the EMA, we began the process of doing that. Just want to, commend the staff. Even before the report was completed, they began doing work related to how do we share resources. This is one of those that has been, it's currently being implemented. We actually combine the fuel operations and the sewer maintenance work. This actually allows the staff to cross-train the staff so they can do a variety of work within this new team that has been created. I want to say thank you to...
Is this a picture of the sinkhole on the west side?
Not the one on Fulton.
No, that's not the west side.
No? Okay. Just curious. I had not seen that angle or that hole before.
We also, here's another example of the work that has been implemented out of the plant. We also combine the utility locating operations. This now allows one person actually to do all of the buried utilities and actually go and locate that. In the past, we had the water department, ESD, and traffic safety doing that work. So now it's a single team, and they are being cross-trained to do the work. And by doing that, we actually were able to reduce 1 FTE, and now that person now is supporting the street lighting project with Michael on. So remember, this work, it was not about eliminating position of resources, but how can we use that in a different way, and it's actually producing that. We also, the notion of having one person provide oversight at a higher level within units, they didn't have the oversight of the finance and performance management. We actually were able to do that. And now we have one person that's providing that oversight within the Public Services Department and Parks and Recreation. We had lighting signals and sign, but that because the department has been divided, now that person is concentrating within Public Services and Parks. And what it does is it creates consistency within these two units and how we do projections to ensure that we remain within the financial constraint that has been established. These are recommendations that have been included in the FY19 budget. You're going to hear about the trench repairs coming up from James. He's working with the water departments to do that. We are estimating that potentially the body of work is going to save in the tune of about $300,000 to $500,000 to the water system. And those are dollars that now the water department is looking to reinvest in the lead replacement program that we have in place. So it's how do we use the dollars in a different way to reinvest those dollars? This is what this is about. And then you heard about the street lighting operation and moving traffic signals and signs to Mobility GR. And that's having, I want to say thank you to Josh and Mike for volunteering. If any of them are in here. They actually didn't volunteer to do that, but I want to say thank you to them for taking on that body of work.
Well, Tom, I'll just pipe in and say I'm glad to see that. I think it makes complete sense. And I think many of us have talked about that for a couple years now, about really needing to realign some of those departments. So I will add my thanks, and I think it's a good plan.
Let me give you this. One of the outcomes of this body of work, and I have someone in this room, Arlene Pierce is here, and I think it's official. You announced it, that you're going to retire. So she's done as of the end of June. But I want to say thank you because this, believe it or not, this is, although it looks very simple on a form, but this is now every department within the service group is actually using KPI, and managers that come together, and every month they actually report on 4 areas that are significant to our service group. And this is all implementing things the EMA identified, and we began doing the work before the report was even completed. But what you have before you is every manager actually track and report on financial, business, customer service, and leadership and development. And it's just so every manager get a sense of you managing a company in a way. It's a unit or a department, and you have to know what is going on in that unit. Because of the work this has created, now we actually can anticipate and make decisions before they become a crisis. And then we have before you a list of all of the high impact recommendations that this team is going to be implementing for the next 3 years. They're very significant. Some of them, they might produce what we are anticipating, some may not. But I think I always said that we can only get better. This body of work, we can only improve as we implement those recommendations. And what you're going to see is departments will be bringing individual items to be reviewed and approved by you, but just know that they all link to this plan that we had created, or a roadmap with the assistance of EMA. And with that, I mentioned to you this was going to be a brief update. It is a brief update.
All
Any
right,
questions?
Commissioners, questions?
Okay, so next.
Nice job, Tom. Appreciate your leadership.
So I kind of saw the utility of the KPI when I had a question about forestry, and I read the status sheet for forestry, and the answer was in the top 3 lines. So no one had to send me an email or anything, it was just like right there. All right, Allison, how you doing today? So
I told Amy Mayor Bliss's question might make me go into labor, but it's all right.
Sorry.
but, so Allison.
I know you've done a lot of work on this, Allison. My apologies.
So Allison and Asante will take us through a brief review of where we're at and answer any questions.
Thank you. Appreciate the opportunity. And as Commissioner Lanier had mentioned, we brought this forth a couple times before, and really the copy that we provided to you today only has a few minor changes in it. First and foremost, Mayor Bliss had provided some feedback after we presented in late April, so we incorporated her comments and revisions, suggested revisions to a number of the items, so a few of those have been updated. We also condensed it a little to only include the most pertinent information, so we removed some of the columns from previous versions that were really included more to help hold staff accountable for the recommendations that they suggested for value streams in phase 4. So hopefully it looks a little more streamlined and is in a more readable format for you. And then the last part that really changed was Mayor Bliss had also asked as a specific follow-up to have some clarification around baseline numbers. We've really been pushing to try to make the goals as quantitative as possible. So identifying with respect to actual numbers, a baseline number, as well as where things would be for fiscal year 19 to measure against. So let's see, if I just pick one of the examples, if you turn on the, I want to see. I thought I would find one more easily, but because Stephanie's up there, we'll pick on page 5 at the top. It's one of the clerk's value streams. It's the very first one. We also added numbers now to make things a little easier if you would like to refer to something. So 15-01 is a goal for the clerk. So if you look over to the right, this goal was specifically around increasing voter turnout in some specific pilot areas. And so we asked the clerk's office to identify what is your current baseline right now by which you will be measuring this goal. So they provided some great information, said 43.96% of turnout in the November 2016 election. That was the baseline based on the data that they have. So their goal is actually, if you look under the end date, is not until fiscal year 2021. So we'll be measuring, and at the last report out, it was requested that we do presentations every 6 months with respect to progress on the transformation plan. So we'll still report out and the clerk will still provide information, but this goal is not something that they're looking to hit until the end of fiscal year 2021. For any goal that is listed in that column on the very far right, that is exactly what they'll be measuring against for fiscal year 2019 purposes. So if you look at the second one, and some of them, they're not necessarily all quantitative, but the second one, that's the clerk's 1502, the actual goal at the end of the year will be, did you generate quarterly reports? Yes or no? Yes, you met the goal. No, you did not meet the goal. So trying to really streamline so that we're moving away from lengthier qualitative report outs and trying to get to a more streamlined report out. So those are the predominant changes that were made for this particular version of what was shared with you on the slides. We ended up, after Mayor Bliss's recommendations, I think just a couple were eliminated, and there was one I know specifically for the fire department that was added after some conversations in the budget discussions that we added. But we maintained 110 that are currently included. So just as a reminder, we started with 202 recommendations. So I know 110 might still seem a little high, but I think that the core team and under Eric's leadership, we've worked really hard to try to streamline that as much as possible. So you can see the breakdown by pillar, where the goals currently fall. And then a reminder, there was a little bit of a discussion, but one of the value streams that was created was specifically for the departments to create their own department strategic plan, thinking about particularly when the fire department gave their report out on their on their strategic plan, and we started thinking about how can we streamline the transformation plan to ensure this is really that high level overarching strategy that aligns with city commission priorities better, and getting this a little more condensed, but not wanting to lose a tracking mechanism and a method to hold departments accountable for work that has previously been included in this plan, but probably is not appropriate to be included in the plan. It was just more kind of your day-to-day operation style work. And so one of the fiscal year 19 goals in this transformation plan, this phase, is that each department will create their own strategic plan by the end of this year. So a lot of the items, and we've communicated with the departments that any items that have been removed out of here should be components of their strategic plan so that they don't lose sight of that and that they're still ensuring that it's being tracked and reported on. And so this graph that Asante created, so I want to give him all credit for this, is really trying to show how the plans connect together. With the sustainability plan ultimately, and I know Mayor Bliss and I have had a couple conversations with the new Sustainability Advisory Committee, and really using them to help us think about our sustainability plan high level, and for the next iteration where that might go. But for now, that being kind of our high level strategic plan with its connection to the transformation plan. And then kind of this next level down is the department strategic plans. And the fiscal plan, all of these plans should be aligning and supporting what's being requested in the fiscal plans.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner?
So then, is it expected then of every department to have a strategic plan completed by a certain time period, or not necessarily?
Yes. So
Okay.
for this one, asking the departments to have their plans completed by the end of fiscal year 19. And so the plan for the department would technically cover fiscal years 20 and 21 to keep them aligned with now the transformation plan and sustainability plans ending at the end of fiscal year 21 as well.
Good, and so are they gonna use the same methodology that the fire department used? I know both of us were impressed with that, and
Yep.
I don't remember if the chief is gone, I don't
Yeah.
remember if they had a consultant or not, but
No, they did it
I know
themselves, and
they
actually,
trained themselves or something.
well, they used the lean techniques that they've used,
Uh-huh.
and developed that out of their strategic planning office, and so we intend to use them as internal consultants.
Good, okay.
I'm sorry, we're going to use them as a resource, but I don't think that we have the intention that every single department is going to use their exact method. We're going to facilitate as much as we can opportunities to do these strategic plans, but many departments already have plans, and so I don't think the intention is the fire department is the only way to do it. And it should be said that the fire department has dedicated staff that covers their strategic planning, and other departments don't have that same type of resource. So that exact method that the fire department used might not be appropriate for all departments.
I think part of the first year is that we can assess what the departments create to determine is there a specific template, format, process to ensure consistency across departments. I think under the short time frame, my understanding is the fire department, as Asante said, has had their own resources and experts in-house, and that probably to create that quality level of a report would take some financial support for departments, and some that hasn't currently been integrated in the budget, but that I think a good goal would be to go through the process for this year with that in mind for, the following year and to think about.
Yeah, because I think that there's something to having a consistent way of measuring and looking at and even sharing with the commission. That's one of the reasons that I like the A3 process, because
Right.
you're looking at the same information in the same context. And so when you have different models, then, it can become confusing. And so,
Yeah, and that's-
but I understand the barriers that may exist too for departments who may not have the same resources.
Commissioner?
Well, I'm wondering, that the Lean Initiative was something that was supposed to spread throughout the entire organization. And I think key to it too is always getting some information from those who are on the ground actually delivering the services. And we used to have staff, and I recall Nancy Meyer was one, who did help with people throughout the organization. And I don't know where we are with that now in terms
We
of
do have trained the trainers.
support.
I mean, Mary Beth.
We do have trained trainers. We have, I think we put 5 or 6 people through the GRCC program, which is an awesome program. That's where both, you might remember Rob Pease before he left. Brad Brown has been through it. Scott Gray's been through it. We put others through it as well. And so we have a team around that function that Tom Almonte has been meeting with and shepherding forward. So we have this team, and actually this slide that you see is really, in its essence, a lean implementation. So we're working to get similar templates into people's hands so they can do the work in the same way. And the A3 is being used by more and more departments, particularly as I and you pay more attention to the A3 and actually ask for them. People kind of get the message, and so it's been when. Yes. Well, they actually did a couple. So.
They're on our agenda.
That's a question for next week.
I'll let you ask them then.
So, so we are getting penetration, I think. And it's not, I think we're getting good penetration, but it's not thorough and deep yet.
Well, and I know this started in about 2010, so we're at 2018. And I know we lose people. We're losing 50% of our organization, so I understand that that's going to happen. But I think it's very valuable, and the reason is, having read Managing to Learn, it was Toyota that literally took their foot off the accelerator with that, and then they had huge problems in their organization. And if we do the same, I think we're not going to have the same kind of quality of constantly, that whole continuous improvement loop and really digging into the data.
I think actually we're becoming more data driven. That's what the message in this budget was about.
Mm-hmm.
We're implementing lean. We're continuing to make lean progress. The A3, if you want to do something big, significant, scary, you better do an A3. Mm-hmm. So we're getting the message out, and the work that Tom's doing with EMA, one of the main things there is using lean principles.
Yeah.
So we're using it more and more. We've not lost sight of it, and we intend to continue to implement.
Great, it's been valuable.
And there is a value stream regarding the lean within the current draft of the transformation plan. And so we are intending to reinvigorate some of our efforts.
Well, no, that's okay. I'll just add a couple things. One, thank you for making it more concise and reducing it from 200 and some to 110, and for taking my feedback and trying to streamline it a little bit and make it a little more concise, but also more digestible and take out some of the real bureaucratic language, in my opinion. I know this is largely internal and is, created to provide clear goals and accountability, and I appreciate that. But I also haven't always, and I'm sure all of us do in our mind, how do we make sure we're communicating this to the public? And I still think it is confusing to try to explain the interconnection between sustainability plan, transformation plan. Now we're including in the budget and expectations around departmental strategic plans and then the overall fiscal plan. So my hope is that you all get together with Amy and really think through communications, even that we still have the language value stream. No one outside of this organization knows what we talk about when we say that word. So maybe we can put in parentheses goals, some type of language that makes it a little more clear of what we're talking about would be helpful too. And I'll let you all work on that. So, Commissioner.
I was just gonna also ask the question about, as departments are looking at this, and maybe Eric, this is, as city manager, this is a question for you to respond to, regarding the equity plan. So we've also talked about departments, doing an assessment, an equity
Yep.
assessment, and doing an
So as
equity
we-
plan.
Yep.
So how does that fit in with strategic plans? And I'm also thinking about capacity for the multiple departments and what it is we're expecting of them.
Mhm.
So, yeah.
So expectations never go down. So, I expect more, and I know you do too. So we're working to help provide them with tools and guidance for what the strategic plan should include. One of the elements that the plan needs to include is an analysis of equity.
Okay.
So which is one of the reasons why I wanted the strategic plans, is so we had a place in a reason that fit into the overall strategy to do that in a consistent way. So equity will be part of it, how they're meeting lean implementation goals. There'll be, things that are in, that Tom showed you from the KPI, financial things. So stuff that doesn't, the equity is really important, and we need everybody to be doing it. But the other stuff is more for group managers to look at and make sure that they're meeting their budgetary targets and the performance goals that you might see in the KPI. So it'll be a combination of both, but equity is clearly one of those things that'll be done through that plan.
Okay.
And so everybody will be doing it.
Thank you.
All right, other questions about the revisions to the transformation plan? So Allison and Asante, if commissioners read through this one more time and have additional comments or recommended changes, can they just email that to one of you?
Email it to both of us. Allison probably won't be here, but I'll take care of it.
And I think too, I don't know if there's an answer now, but the question that you posed as to when we would like the goal for a completion, whether we're still aiming for the fiscal plan or what your thoughts were. I wasn't sure if in the earlier conversation I heard a consensus or answer on that, so.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I'm fine with including it in the fiscal plan if we have a clear expectation for it to come back in 6 months and we can revisit that. And as we kind of work through these strategic plans and, maybe the communications will help connect these dots a little bit more clearly so that we can explain it when we're asked. So I think if we get something on our schedule in 6 months, we can revisit it, and if we want to make changes, then we can. Commissioners, are you good with that?
Thank you very much. I really appreciate that, and we'll have this be part of the resolution on the 12th.
Okay.
So, thank you. And if you do have any questions, get those to, or suggested changes, get those to Asante.
Yes,
And
as
Allison.
soon as you can. Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Allison.
Okay, so in your packet, behind the agenda, you'll see a memo that contains the answers to some of your questions. And you can read these at your, in more detail when you have an opportunity. So the first memo has to do with police and fire department variances. So Scott Sandy could go through that if you wish. Or you could read it on your own.
Well, I think I think we should go through it publicly.
Okay.
I mean, there are questions we posed publicly, so I don't know if you want to go through it or Jeff or
I think Scott.
Scott. Okay.
Be happy to walk you through some of the
Yeah,
items
just
on
hit
the...
on the highlights maybe.
Oh, sure, absolutely. Basically, as I indicated on the memo kind of summarizing, what I did was take and limit the detail that's on each variance report to any individual expense item that was at least $100,000 in variance from last year's budget to this year's request. I did specifically include, however, OPEB, even though I think in both cases it didn't meet the 100,000, just because I know there's usually an interest in that item, and also claims, because there was a fairly significant change in the way that was allocated across departments this year. But other than those two items, we stuck to $100,000 variance. And then there's a line in each section that's entitled "Not Detailed Above." Basically, I wanted these reports to still tie back to the fiscal plan department detail. So that is basically just a sum total of all the amounts that aren't detailed separately above. The attachments provide both a dollar amount and percentage change between the 2 years, and then brief comments are also provided directly to the right, explaining the variance. And finally, the last item of detail that I included on these reports is I believe there was some interest in knowing, especially in the personal service category, just what percentage of the total request each item represented. So that's the far right column where it says percent of total 19 proposed. And again, the top section is personal services and the bottom section is other services. I believe attachment A is for the fire department and attachment B is for the police department. In glancing through that, if you have any specific questions, I'd be happy to address them. Otherwise, I could also, let me briefly just kind of go through some of the larger ones on here. I'll start with the fire department on attachment A. You can see there's just over $1 million increase in personal services, and it's really mostly comprised of two items: the full-time wage expense at $427,000, and that's being driven by a 2% wage increase that was projected, and the department also had a few budget substitutions of positions during FY18 that slightly increased that cost as well. The second item, I think every department across the board was being hit with this, was the hospitalization insurance. And under the comments section, I put the annual rate per person for each department. And obviously, police and fire being very personnel heavy, they are hit particularly hard by this rate. So it went from $12,334 in 18 all the way up to $14,402 in 19, being driven just by increased health costs, increased claims experience. And then finally, I also included a pension fund that was up $112,000. You can see the rate increase off to the right there. And again, the item's not detailed for personal services is about $117,000. I think on the other services, the only item I'd like to note, I think I mentioned a little earlier in this presentation, is we did do a better job this year of weeding out what was really considered non-capital items out of the capital reserve funding. And you can see that here for fire on the equipment line of $185,602. That involved things like boots, fire hoses, PPE that just really did not meet the capitalization criteria, and so we wanted to move those out of the capital reserve fund to free up resources and get them back where they belonged in operations. So overall for fire, $1.4 million increase, or 4.77%. Turning to attachment B for the police department, you can see they had nearly a $2 million increase from the 18 budget in personal services. Almost half of that is, again, the full-time wages of $990,092. The large driver here is we did have the COPS 14 grant end, so we had to move 10 officers out of the police grants fund and back into the general fund, so that was probably the most significant hit in that category. And then we did have one position substitution and a 2% wage increase here. So again, almost 4.5% increase in that one line item. We had a little bit of an increase in temps for a number of interns being increased from 30 to 35, and you can see how that's calculated off to the right. Hospitalization insurance, once again, almost $800,000 increase from last year. Pension, believe it or not, I called that a slight rate increase, but it still generated a $230,000 variance from last year. That rate went up just a little bit. And I did want to point out, we put it in default payroll, but that's basically the department's budget for their recruit classes each year. We budgeted 10 recruits per class. Each class is 6 months each, and so that actually came out to 834, 534. But just in further discussions with the department, they felt comfortable reducing that budget by $200,000 to assist them in meeting their target goals this year. So again, personal services up 4.78%. And then under the other services category, you can see an increase again for contractual employees, kind of detailed out what comprises that. The jail fees on the plus side, that did come down $100,000 just due to a rate reduction from Kent County. Claims, again, based on reallocation across departments, as a 2012 streets department claim fell off the history where the streets department had been absorbing more of that expense over recent years because of that large claim. Now that's fallen off the schedule in terms of how that's calculated, so other departments are getting a larger hit for claims expense. Fleet management charges up almost $113,000 due to increased vehicle leases and the rates associated with that. And similar to what I mentioned on fire under computer equipment, again, PC replacements are no longer, and actually for some time haven't been considered capital in nature. They're, believe it or not, more of a supplies expense these days. And so that was moved again out of capital reserve to general fund operations. So in total, the police department's looking at about a $2.6 million increase, or 5.24%.
Okay, so commissioners, let's talk about questions on these before we move to the next item. Can we, have we, or and this has probably happened internally, are we thinking about what we can do to address the increased hospitalization insurance? I know we're self-insured, but I gotta believe, I mean, if we continue to grow at this rate, it's just not sustainable. I mean, that's exponential.
Yeah, it was tough this year. We had very, very difficult claims experience, so what we're doing is, one thing we're doing is we're working with the MMSA, the Michigan Municipal Services Authority, on a potential stop-loss insurance. So we would buy insurance that would protect us over a certain loss limit, which currently we don't have. So if we were to experience a even more significant catastrophic loss, we're kind of bare for that. So that will help a little bit. And I think Mary Beth is here, Jeff is here. They can talk a little bit more about what we're doing with the TPA and other things to control our costs. But I think mostly this was driven by loss experience. So, Mary Beth or Jeff?
Because we're so funded, how much we can't do.
Actually, Mayor and Commissioners, there were several factors that contributed to it. A part of it was with, I think, for high-cost claims, but a significant portion of it was we had a drop-off of our savings that we had accumulated. We had like a $7 million savings over the last several years, and we were at the tail end of that dropping off, using up the remainder of that, which always offsetted the last several years. We also have a 3-year smoothing that occurs, that was negotiated in terms of cost increases, and that contributed to it as well. I think that overall, we're not too far out of line with what other entities are in terms of our claims experience, but these other factors contribute to it, and we have to account for that. So even as we speak, we're getting close to the end of the health insurance year over the last 12 months, and we already see a decrease in terms of actual claims experience. So there are a lot of things that contribute to health insurance, including the cost industry of, I'm on the Spectrum Health Advisory of what the hospitals are charging, what's going on with the hospitals and providers. So healthcare is changing, and the ADA, or the ACA, the new healthcare law that was passed when President Obama was in office, there are things that impact the health industry wide with costs. And so there are a lot of things that contributed to it, but as Eric said, one of the smaller things we're looking at is stop loss with the MMSA. That may help in some ways, but it's not only claims.
Okay. Other questions?
We did also do the healthcare pilot program. Started it last year, I think, the wellness program. So we're in our second year of that. We hope that will continue to work to reduce claims. So that's a piece as well. And last contract, we did work on specialty drugs as well, and we hope to maybe do some additional work with, because specialty drugs are very, very expensive. So. One thing I did want to mention on the pension, we did get our new pension report for the police and fire, and we had built in a $500,000 increase each year. It's just a plug figure until we got the report. And I'm happy to report our $500,000 number was slightly high for 19, so you'll see a small adjustment, but the out years were actually lower. So you'll see that in the final fiscal plan, those adjustments. So a little bit of good news.
Gets worse before it gets better. That's what you're telling us.
Right.
Okay, thank you.
We always hear.
It doesn't get worse as bad as we thought it was.
Great.
Mayor, in regard
It's
to
bad, just not that bad.
Mayor, in regard to the healthcare, the rise in healthcare, a little of this is just, as Eric said, it's not much we can do because we're self-insured.
Right.
I mean, I think the extra insurance is certainly something we should consider, but I mean, it's just the nature of.
So we made it, I'm sorry.
That's it.
We made a choice many years ago that I think was a good one to self-insure. Mary Beth, Jeff, the team around Mary Beth, Scott Buer before her, or before Jeff, have really done a great job of managing this thing. We have enjoyed relatively stable and low rates for a long time. This year, we did pop up, and hopefully it's an aberration, but we need to pay attention to it, because you're right, we can't sustain a 16% increase every year in healthcare costs and be sustainable. So.
And Eric, is that decision reevaluated periodically?
Yep.
I can't remember.
Over the
time
last
we did.
10 years, we have gone out for bid on our insurance at least 3 times. The last two times Scott Buer was on the team, and if we were fully insured, we'd be paying $2 to $3 million more. So it's always been really a full analytic review of how we run the fully insured plan. Our employees are paying 20% as required by the state, which we're finding it difficult in the recruitment area because nobody who's in private sector, basically, who are applying for our jobs, a lot of people are not paying right now 20%. Some are paying more, but a lot of people are paying something less, we're finding. So, I mean, I think we're saving the taxpayers' money with the plan that we have. There were major concessions, and we continue to vigilantly monitor that. And the union leadership, I have a quarterly meeting with all the union presidents, and we micromanage our program, and that's why they have an interest, as Jeff said, in looking at us modifying the specialty drugs, which has gone up 400%. Just specialty drugs. We've capped ours somewhat, but we got more work to do, and so it is complicated, but.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions, commissioners, about that? All right.
Go ahead, Scott.
And then moving along after the variances, the next schedule that you'll see in here was the request for police department authorized sworn staffing. And we took it back about 20 years, going back to fiscal '98, and it's divided between the general fund sworn staffing and then police grants. That includes both the police grants fund and their drug law fund as well. There's no questions on that. The last item that we received, I'm sorry.
I actually am going to ask whoever asked for this to weigh in, because it seemed like it was more than just the numbers. It was the numbers plus population of the city, or numbers and something else.
I think it might have, you're making me remember something that I was thinking about.
Crime rate too.
Crime rate, it was crime rate. So we can supplement this with that.
Okay.
It's crime rate.
But, we'll provide that information. I won't comment on it.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks.
So thank you. We'll get that added. And then the last item that was requested that we have available today is detailed regarding the improvements on the civil service examination, which, I don't know, Mary Beth, do you have any comments you'd like to make on that?
No, I think the memo has self-explanatory.
Okay.
Yeah, my only question after reading the memo is how many tests do we have? How many different tests do we have?
That's a great question. question, Mayor. We have actually 160 tests. They cover over 300 categories. However, we suspended requiring a civil service test for licensed positions as part of something we were doing a few years ago to expedite our hiring of skilled trades. I think Commissioner Allen and who's ever on the Fiscal Committee has been tracking with us. The Civil Service Board has been very pleased that we've suspended civil service tests, so that's about 20 of those. So really we're running about 140 tests that probably now covers about 220 or so job classifications.
And remind me, what requires us to use civil service tests? Is that in our charter, or is it?
The charter requires a competitive test exam process, and so we do everything to, what shall I say, streamline, and the Civil Service Board actually is getting ready to do a full test review audit of all tests of our test process and testing, which is really great. It's a good time to do it. I like that they're doing it while I'm here, but it is a charter.
But does the charter specify, I haven't read the charter in ages, but does it specify civil service tests, or does it just say competitive?
Civil service examinations must be done for classified positions.
But we have discretion within that prescription to design the test in a way that the Civil Service Board wishes to.
Yeah.
So we have, it says, I think this is something that you're probably examining, but what does competitive mean? Does competitive mean pass-fail? Or does competitive mean, score by percentage? So.
Yeah, and I'll just add, as a member of the Civil Service Board, we, and I think I talked about this a little bit when this question came up weeks ago. We're just getting started. We have a work session, I think, in June. Scheduled in June to kind of unpack a lot of it. Because we've been so busy with at least since I've been a member of the board, with the comp study and things of that nature, we're just kind of getting to the point where we can spend some time, because it's going to have to take, especially with as many tests as we have, more than one conversation to try and unpack it in order to determine what's the best way to streamline this. And I think staff, they are already prepared. At our last meeting, we ran out of time, but they already had materials ready to try and have that conversation. The legal team has already been a part of helping us to know what we can and cannot talk about in public, because if you discuss too much of it in the public's meeting, then you disclose the test for those who may potentially be interested in testing for a position. So we're trying to balance all of that. We have some closed session studies planned, as well as some work sessions to just try and review all of it so that we can come up with the right best thing. I'm hoping that Mary Beth will not retire until we're done, so that we can make sure we have the institutional knowledge behind some of this work as we're trying to make some decisions. So I can't even tell you how long it's going to take, because we've only had one meeting where we just touched the tip of the ice, the tip of the iceberg. So I'm not even sure how long it'll take us to get through it, but I don't think it'll be fast. If it's the end of the year, that's hopeful, in my opinion.
Well, and I'm glad to hear that, and I'll be curious if you are able to take a look at what, like, let's say Mercy's doing, and the career pathways. I mean, there's an assessment component of that hiring practice, and it's been proven to remove unconscious bias. But that's, other organizations are looking at that as well, because the outcomes are significant, and it removes barriers to hiring. So I'll just be curious if you're able to spend some time looking at that as well.
That's a really good point, and colleagues, if anyone else has a recommendation of a model that you would want us to look at as we're going through this process, at some point I think we'll outline what that process will be, and then it'll talk about what we'll vet and look at, or what we'll just keep because it's working really well. And I think once we kind of look at that and make an assessment, we can determine. But if you have any recommendations, because I know you and I have been talking about Mercy for some time, so that's on my radar, but many of the others are not, unless it's something that I'm personally familiar with. So I welcome that feedback if you have anything.
Well, and just as an FYI, Michigan Works and The Source, they're working on a potential grant to work with organizations and companies to implement career pathways. And yes, and so that there may be some resources there to work in partnership with Jacob and Mindy. Yeah, so you may want to follow up on that.
I will, thank you.
All right.
And Mindy's on the Civil Service Board, so that the time, that can tie into that really well.
Very good. All right. This is helpful. Good to know.
Okay, so those were the ones we had time to assemble, and we'll bring more next week. And so we'll pick up questions that we got today, to the extent we can, and questions that we picked up on the 15th, and bring those forward that we haven't answered. And so we finished a little early, and we have some time for, I mean, if there are I guess I'm curious and would like to know if there are additional questions, things that we haven't covered that you would like us to cover.
Yeah, let's go around, and if there are some additional things we would like added to our agenda next week, then let's let Eric know those now. So Commissioner Kelly, did you have a comment?
Well, one thing, and I know that years ago the city had a doctor in the house, and employed here. And given our healthcare concerns, I don't know if it's worth doing any research, if there are others that do that, and if it's a prevention model, might be worth exploring. The other thing is, we talked about, and I thought about this again because we were looking at the variance summaries here about police and fire, and we just started to talk a little bit about the difficulties in the market to compete around health insurance and so on. But what about those other amenities we've talked about to get, to have a conversation, for example, with the county about childcare here and some flex hours and that sort of thing.
Yeah, so I think, we're getting ready to move into labor negotiations again.
Yeah.
And anything we do in that area, if we're going to distribute it widely through the organization, we want to negotiate with our partners. And so I think in that context, we should have that conversation. And I've learned a little bit about the maternity benefit, having to deal with, work Allison through the system. And so I know that there are things that we can improve there. And it's also a value stream in the transformation plan. So we intend to focus on that, because I think those types of things will make us more competitive. For example, there is a locker room facility downstairs. Did anybody know that?
Yes, I did, but
I use it all the time.
Yeah, okay,
for
so.
men and women.
It's supposed to be co-ed.
Co-ed.
That's not working out real well. So, if we want to encourage people to work out like Joe does, or Tom, or Jeff do, or even Amy. Amy works out a lot, but not using that locker room. So, we have to find a way to make stuff like that more available. And I think that's a commendable thing, and it will make us a more valuable employer, more valued employer.
Yeah. Commissioners, other topics you want added next week, or you'd like to explore further? No.
When are we circling back to the community policing?
Yeah, what was the timeline on that?
Well, we can do that when you wish. So part of it is trying to get all the elements to come together. So following our meeting last week, Police Chief and I had a meeting with Mr. Ransford, and that meeting went pretty well. So I expect there to be something going forward to you to do an assessment for cure violence within the community. That would be the first step in moving forward with a hybrid, considering moving forward with a hybrid plan. So that should happen, by June 12th. And then we can see how that all blends in. So really we can have a discussion next week if you'd like. We can have a discussion anytime during this process. But no, I think the key thing is let's try to have as much information as we can, because we have the dollars allocated. So it's not a matter of not having the dollars. It's making sure we make the right investment in the right mix. And I think we made lots of progress last week, and that was really important. So we can schedule that whenever you wish.
Maybe we should have that on the agenda on, Commissioner, you're not going to be here on June 5th, are you?
I won't be on the 5th, and I'm wondering, when are we hearing from 21st CP? Is that?
The 6th.
Yeah.
That's the 6th.
The 6th, the
Okay.
5th and the 6th are gonna be here.
Yeah.
So I wonder, Commissioner, if you're not physically here, I wonder if you can have a phone conversation with them, and then,
Yep, I've spoken with,
Done that? Okay.
with Anita about sitting with them on the 4th possibly,
Oh,
if not a
good.
phone call.
oh, good,
Yeah.
good.
So it might be the 12th or even July 10th, could be a time.
Yeah, I mean, I personally would like to see that as a part of this budget and have that approved. As I said last time that we talked about that, we've been talking about violence prevention program for years. It's in the SAFE plan. All of us have said it's a priority. It'd be nice to have that move forward. I know that it's important to Commissioner Allen, as well as Commissioner Lanier, and Commissioner Jones went and spoke to SAFE about it. Commissioner Kelly's been serving on SAFE as well. So I'd like to see that move forward with the larger conversation about the A3. I think last time we talked about all of you taking a look at the A3 and then scheduling a time to meet with the chief if you have questions.
Right. So I'll work with the chief and Jeff to figure that out. So one thing that is good news is that we can have an indication of what we wish to do, and it will require budget amendments to implement, because we have to move the money from where it's at, which currently is in, I believe, in the executive office, into the operating department. So that will require budget amendments. So we can have a discussion about direction and then do the implementation thereafter. So it won't affect it won't necessarily affect the sum total of the budget. It'll be something that we can adjust after we adopt the budget, as long as we know which way we're going.
Well, and I thought I remember as well the conversation about if we allocate funds, we can seek grant funds to match that. And I think once we have a commitment, once we know how much it costs, we want to do, let's say, I think we talked about a 3-year pilot, we can then go and seek matching funds from foundations. But we can't do that until we know, yes, we're committed, this is what we're going to do, this is the overall cost, this is our financial contribution.
And the same is true with the COPS grant. So we say we want to add these officers, and we can pursue a COPS grant to cover half of that cost.
Yeah. And there, I was just reading about some, the applications are open again for COPS grants, and we should be exploring those.
So I have a question really for this body. If we're going to have a conversation at this table on the 5th, and then the community has one on the 6th.
So maybe we should do it on the 12th.
I think it's 12th.
Right, I mean, I think we should hear from the community first.
Yeah, that's a good
Because we
idea.
don't know what else they might be recommending, and I know that there's the task force, but there's also SAFE. There are many groups that are talking about how can we make progress around this issue of police-community relations. For example, we've got the restorative justice work going on, and that a similar group out of the Dispute Resolution Center has brought to the SAFE table this potential opportunity for mediation. I think we need to keep the door open to talk about these things. We just, because of the time constraints, we can't get it all done. There's a whole fund to have to consider, not just police, of course, in that particular issue. But I just don't want to close the door, and I don't think it is closed. That money is set aside as we continue to explore and measure and improve. That we just need to continue to have those conversations with our community.
Well, why don't we plan then to put it on the agenda for June 12th?
Okay.
I will.
Okay, at COW.
Echo. Jeff, do you have anything to add?
Okay.
Yeah, just wanted to point out real quick, we have at this point added the $1 million in that 5th year. That was not in the preliminary fiscal plan, so that will be in the final fiscal plan. We're planning on that. So if something does happen, it would extend throughout 5 years, and we can always do something through a BA throughout the year anytime. So if it doesn't get done by the date that it has to be adopted, we could easily do an amendment going forward. So.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay, great.
Good.
And with the pension changes, it actually made those out years actually look a little better right now. So that $1 million was able to fit in, and the fund statement still looks better than it did in the preliminary fiscal plan. So that's great.
Doesn't look any worse than it did.
Unless the market crashes.
Right.
Some economists are saying we should be prepared for that. So, all right, we will end this budget session. Commissioners, we're back in here tonight at 7 p.m.
Yes.
All right?
Right. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you.